Okay, first things first, I lied. The title's a lie. You can't actually make a good story out of this. But since you can still make good gameplay, I wanted the titles to match, so whatever. It has a nice ring to it, does at the very least. But anyways, alright, let's get into this shit. This is less of a direct examination of this particular game and more of a general philosophical deep dive into the concept of remakes, and then I'll talk about this game a lot. But first, I need to make sure we're on the same page. Now, I'll be honest. I know relatively little about Advent Children, Crisis Core, Dirge of Cerberus, all those spin-offs. Do you know why I know very little about them? Because I have absolutely no reason to believe that they are worth my time, no desire to consume them. Everything I've ever heard about them from the people that I trust would indicate that they're a blight, a stain on the legacy of FF7. If I'm recalling correctly, Advent Children came out in 2005, and it was a desperate cash grab for the company because they were in so much financial ruin after the massive failure of Spirits Within. Sakaguchi, fucking lunatic visionary that he was really obsessed with the idea of the virtual actress, as he called it. The company trusted him because Sakaguchi had built the company up to what it was, more or less. He birthed Final Fantasy as a series from his own fucking colon. It was his influence that made banger after banger after banger, incredible games, just a few years apart from each other, such as FF5, 6, and 7. So they trusted Sakaguchi, and to be fair, he fucked up big time. Virtual actresses were not a thing like he was so confident they would be. It was a very creative and interesting idea, but it did not pan out at all, and he was the fall guy. Sakaguchi left the company shortly after this massive financial failure. He made some other games after that I've never played personally, but I've at least heard some decent things about, but they're not well known enough to be part of the grapevine, so that's cool, I guess. Now he's literally just making iOS games. He's been doing that for the last couple decades, pretty much. Just like how the old, Silent Hill creative heads were reportedly working on mobile games for young girls not too long ago. Although, while those chads were definitely not happy to be working on mobile games, I'm under the impression, based on the interviews that I've read from that Sakaguchi is a bit of a fucking weirdo. In the same sense, with his innovative mentality that allowed him to create a game like FF7 in the first place, Sakaguchi seems to be wildly in favor of rampant boundary-pushing creativity. So he seems to see the iOS landscape as a creative opportunity to make unique gaming experiences, rather than the trashy medium that I myself and I think most people probably view it as. And Godspeed to him. I hear that his next game will be coming out this year. I'm no fan of iOS games, but maybe I'll give it a shot. Will this path of his be as ill-conceived as the virtual actress, or is his passionate creativity finally striking gold again, as it did over and over with the Final Fantasy series? We'll have to wait and see. Anyways, to make up for the horrific failure of Spirits Within and virtual actresses as a concept, Square kicked out Sakaguchi, their golden boy, the man who became a video game legend from being just a nobody with barely enough influence to ask his bosses for the right to work on a little side project he called Final Fantasy at the time, when Squaresoft had no faith in making a turn-based RPG succeeding in a big way like that. And all these years later, he's out the door. And just 1 year after that, Advent Children plops its cock onto the table. And what a cock it is. So, the first major FF7 spin-off was a desperate cash grab from a company just trying to milk its valuable IP for a quick buck, and it was made immediately after the guy responsible for making the entire Final Fantasy series, who put a massive amount of his own personal experience and ideas into FF games, especially FF7, he literally no longer works there. So, does that set of circumstances scream artistic integrity to you? I don't think so. Contrary to what seems to be popular belief, games don't just come out of the ether, fully formed. They are actually made by human beings called developers. Shocking, I know. Just because something has FF7 in its title does not mean that it is of the same quality or artistic integrity. It does not mean that anything in it was originally the intention of the older creator, so on and so forth. Not too long ago, we received news that Nomura isn't going to be the director for part 2 of this remake series that they're now doing. And I did not see a single person talking about this. Fucking Maximilian Dude didn't make a video about it, despite his tendency to make videos on the most insignificant pieces of information surrounding the things he's into, especially FF7 Remake. You know why he didn't make a video talking about how, when they announced that Nomura was not going to be the lead for the next game? Because these fucking people just literally think that games make themselves. They don't fear that the game not having one of its lead creative heads might render a drop in quality or some significant change, because they don't understand that games are made by people, some talented and some not so much. They don't care that Sakaguchi, the man who is by far and away the most responsible for everything in the original FF7, has nothing to do with this remake or anything else FF7 since it came out, because they think that games make themselves. That just Square, by slapping the name FF7 onto something, it automatically ensures its quality, it automatically becomes respectable. There are literally people, and I struggle to believe they exist, but they do, and that honestly wonder, that have literally posed the question as to whether or not the story elements from Advent Children and Crisis Core were intended all along from the original creators of FF7. Fucking murder me. Kill me. Like, please, in my sleep somewhere, just do it as fast as possible. Why am I on the same planet as these fucking people? Like, fuck. Why is it still widely believed that FF7R has the exact same creative staff as the original FF7? Probably because people like Maximilian Dude just blatantly lie to their brainwashed fan bases and tell them that the remake has the same staff as the original, which would basically be like if George R.R. Martin's editor decided to write the next Song of Fire and Ice book without George, and people said that it was created by the same people that made the original, quote-unquote.
The people that made FF7 Remake are the same people that made the original FF7. And in very similar roles, which is funny.
Guys, this is literally a fucking lie. Do the bare minimum amount of research to see if this is true or not. And even if you consider that this to be the same as the original game, that argument kind of falls apart when you look at something like Advent Children, which Nomura was also directing, Kitase producing, and Nojima on scenario writing or whatever. If you let people like Max lie to your face and trick you into thinking that this remake has been created by the old gang getting back together, first time since the original or whatever they're implying, then I'm here to save you from those overt falsehoods. This is the first major thing that tricks a lot of people into thinking, oh, I should praise this and think highly of it since it's the same artist as the original. It's not. It just literally isn't. This isn't like an aspect of nuance or some sort of misunderstanding. This is literally just people taking the truth and then saying the exact opposite of the truth. You have been lied to. Now, I haven't really looked into any of those piece of shit spinoffs closely, so I'm not the guy to shit on them specifically. Like you can find other people with a basic comprehension of writing that are familiar with those titles to tear them apart accurately. If you wanted to argue that they're actually good, I have no means of counter-arguing because I don't know anything about them, other than my understanding of the company that created this and companies that do this kind of shit. So, knowing full well what cash grab spin-offs of popular IPs usually end up as. So, as such, that's not the point of this discussion, so I'll leave that at that. Let me first address the concept of canon from a philosophical standpoint. Canon is when the details of a fictional story are considered to be consistent with other separate pieces of fiction, including fan fiction, like headcanon. The term is used when a particular interpretation of a story is considered to be widely accepted by some sort of authority. But who has that authority, and why? Canon is useful for having shit like sequels. For example, take the Marvel Cinematic Universe, whatever, wouldn't exist without the cultural concept of canon. However, most work generally stands on its own, regardless of what comes after. Does canon help to tell a story? Well, if a narrative needs to work off of some existing piece of media, like a sequel does, then the concept of canon, or an accepted interpretation of the existing content, is often helpful for that. But really, you'll find that most stories that have, say, ambiguous content that might lead to multiple different interpretations of the same thing, don't usually have sequels by choice. No, most canon does not exist for the sake of making a story better, making a more insightful, more impactful, or more valuable piece of artistry. No, Canon exists purely in the legal sense. All of that shit I just described, not actually canon. See? Canon is a concept of the one true interpretation, but there is no such thing. If a story exists, one person can write a new additional story following the original story's events or setting with one interpretation, and a different writer somewhere else could write a different sequel or spin-off with a different interpretation of the original, and both stories would be equally valid. The concept of canon, or one which is actually true, is a lie. It's fucking fiction. If you told me what your favorite story is, and I told you that the entire plot line of the story was a drug hallucination, it doesn't make it true or false. It's just my narrative that I am now telling you. Anything can happen in fiction. The official writer could come out and say that all the shit never actually happened, it was all a dream, there's literally nothing that they can't write around to make something true or false at the drop of a hat. There is no what really happened, quote-unquote, in fiction. All there is what the writer of whatever fiction you're currently consuming says happened and what anyone else says happened. That's it. Any story can do anything at any time. Fiction is not bound by real-life rules and restrictions. There is no such thing as truth in fiction. So, what the fuck is canon then? Well, canon is a marketing tool, essentially. Canon is purely a force for pretension. Canon is a force for manipulating a buying audience. Canon is, we have the legal right to say that this is our story and only our interpretation of our story is valid. Canon has nothing to do with writing or artistry or making good art. It's only about claiming ownership over something to make money off of it as a business. It works because people have a natural desire for that type of pretension. Someone else that doesn't work at Square could have also written their own sequel, like say some just dude in his fucking basement, right? He wouldn't be able to profit off of it in any way, but let's say he was an incredible writer who made an astonishing story out of his own sequel to FF7. Let's pretend that art is objective for a second and say that this random guy objectively made a much, much, much better story than what Nomura did with Advent Children. Artistically, the one that should be consumed and praised, in this case, is the one that is better, the one that was made by the more talented writer and created a better story, the one made by the random guy in his basement. But nope, because Nomura works for Square, they get to slap their game with the legal, we own this IP stamp, and that is what determines what people consume. This is what canon is, a way for insecure companies to continue to profit off of a valuable IP by claiming that their work is the one true work in a series, rather than just trusting that they have the actual talent to make something that is actually a worthwhile product and piece of art on its own. Some people really love to live in a fantasy world on this point. They like to tell themselves, oh, I'm certain that everything that comes out in the same franchise was intended from the beginning, and we're just seeing more of this universe that the creator had already envisioned. They don't like to admit when things are just blatantly retcons. For example, retcons or contradictions, or when a spin-off written by a different writer fails to understand the point of the original. Even if it is the same writer, it's still new content. It should be treated as new content. Look at fucking like J.K. Rowling and Harry Potter. Have you seen the shit that she's been pumping out in recent years? Did you watch Fantastic Beasts 2? Not only is it utter garbage content I wouldn't force upon my worst enemies, it's retconning the old Harry Potter story all over the place. She constantly just retcons her narratives. Should you go back and change the old story to match her new ramblings, even if they do nothing but make the stories shittier? I wouldn't. Instead, I'd accurately understand that this new content is indeed new content to be appraised on its own merits, and subsequently ignored for being worthless dog shit naturally. I understand that every individual piece of media is its own separate thing, and there's no one consistent through line of canon. Personally, I would like to read the better story that the random guy in his basement wrote, because I like good stories. I don't care about the imaginary concept of canon, and you shouldn't either. Break free, my friends. But let's talk about what canon is and why people instinctively want to view things through the lens of canon, even if we've already established that having one true canon doesn't actually make art any better. This is a fascinating concept, and it goes down to the very heart of FF7R and why it's written in the way that it is and why it's consumed in the way that it is. Actually, now that I think about it, a lot of people will make a very specific mistake if I jump into the appeal of canon without clarifying some things first. So let's backtrack a little bit. Where do I start? First, we need to define FF7R. But the problem with that is one that I'll get to more as I continue with the analysis, but it's not really anything at all, okay? It's not a remake at all, this game. It's like a weird sequel, but it's also a remake. See, you can't define it as a remake because it isn't a remake by definition. It's a different story entirely that requires the original story to exist in order for it to be told. But it's also not really a sequel because only 5% of this game is actually about the weird time travel multiverse breaking away from the original plotline stuff, and the other 95% of the game is basically just like remake shit. So you can't enjoy this game as a standalone item because almost all of its appeal comes from it being a remake. And because for their own story that they're trying to write, separate from the original story, almost nothing has actually been written so far. So there isn't really a new story for you to consume yet and enjoy if you want to view it as a new story. It's just a very bizarre piece of media. But viewing it as a remake, which is what most of its content is leaning towards, I need to clarify some things. This game is not the original. The spirit of the game is not the spirit of the original. The feeling of playing the game is not the feeling of playing the original. Please do not make this mistake. I figure I should state something that should be obvious, but it's the internet. You can never trust anyone to comprehend the obvious. Hell, I can't even trust the people who are listening to this right now will even comprehend what I'm saying. Copying the surface-level elements of something doesn't mean you're copying the spirit. We can look over countless other remakes and adaptations which have a similar sort of mentality to remakes and see this plainly. Look at, say, the Full Metal Alchemist live-action movie adaptation, for example. It copies a lot of the surface-level plot elements from Full Metal Alchemist and, the events from the original, but it completely fails to put any of it together with any semblance of quality or actually capturing the spirit of the original. Sometimes this is done on purpose, like when a parody, lighthearted or dark, will take the surface-level elements of something but completely change the tone and the message through how those elements are presented and strung together. This actually extends to pretty much all remakes, but there is no such thing as a remake that improves the original. Yes, I'm pretty much like the resident hater of all remakes, but a remake can never achieve what the original did, but just like be a better version of it. It can never achieve what the original did at all. I'll copy and paste my words on this topic from my 2020 video, so here you go. Nothing butters my biscuits more than hearing numbnuts talk about how the remake can improve the original game. Let's clarify something. There's no such thing as improving a story that already exists. A piece of art exists for a purpose intended by the creator or perhaps interpreted by the audience. To change a story would be to change its purpose. It isn't possible to take something and just snip this here or add this thing here and just make it suddenly be an improved version of what it was before. Let me give you a quick example of why this is. Say I took Moby Dick. Long-ass book. Most people actually probably wouldn't like it if they actually got around to reading it. They probably couldn't get through it because half of it is just talking about processing whale oil. Say the book has some typos and grammatical errors maybe. Let's say I went into like a Word document, copy and pasted the entire book script, and cut out the whale oil parts that most people find pretty boring. Let's say, it auto-finds all the typos and grammar errors, so I, fix those too. Well, to some people, I may have improved it, quote-unquote. But there's a few problems with that. One, first and foremost, I obviously don't deserve credit for doing this. What I did was insanely easy to do. The hard part of that entire process was the original author writing the book in the first place. All I did was just cut some shit out and fix some tiny errors. Not exactly praiseworthy. 2, an audience can't consume it as a new piece of media. In the same way that you'll never be able to experience the same story twice for the first time. Like, if a story has a big shocking twist, you can't read it again and be surprised by that twist again. Even if you make alterations, the experience of consuming a modified piece of content is totally different from consuming an original piece of content. You consume original content not knowing what to expect and comparing it to every piece of media you've ever consumed before. You consume modified content looking for what's been changed, already knowing what the original is, hopefully. Although it seems like a shitload of people don't actually seem to fucking remember the original FF7 very accurately. But anyways, you consume modified content through a lens of, how will this be better or worse than the original? Rather than looking for things to like from the ground up, you're only looking for the modifications themselves, not the bigger picture. Long story short, the entire way that you experience it can never be the same as the original. It can't be an improved version of the original experience because it's a totally different kind of experience. 3. By changing the story, I change its purpose. Sure, people can decide how to interpret both the original and the modified versions, so that if they choose to see both as the same thing, that's up to them, but the fact remains that they are not the same. By cutting out all that whale oil shit, I'm changing the creator's vision. I'm changing the creation itself to match some other objective. Sure, saving Eris from dying might make you feel good in a saccharine sort of way, but so you might enjoy it more if that's what you're trying to get out of the game. But that change is fundamentally going against the purpose of the original game. It's not better, it's just different. And that's okay. Different isn't a criticism. Different things should be treated as different things that have different appeals and different pros and cons. Like I said, you'll never be able to consume something new as something you've already consumed. See, that's the thing. When you play a remake, you're actively comparing it to the original at all times. You'll have excitement and anticipation for, say, Cross-Dressing Cloud, because it's a well-liked meme from the original. If you played the original, you would not react or feel this way if you hadn't. You'd like the scene for its own merits, maybe, but it's not like tickling your fan service boner for the original. Sure, you might enjoy both of them, but it is for different reasons. Fangirling over memes and fan service is a completely different type of appeal from feeling like liking something for just being really fucking good on its own. Let's talk about that feeling. This feeling is the same concept as hype. I've never talked about this before on the internet, but know that hype is essentially its own form of entertainment separate from what you feel hype over. Hype is a feeling of community involvement, of being in a club that all share your same positive opinion of something, or negative for that matter. You can be hyped for negative things. You can be hyped with your friends and all giddy at the idea of tearing apart a shitty movie that you're expecting, for example. A great example of this would be the Omicron LP from the Super Best Friends. If they were playing the game on their own, with no channel, no friends, no shared history with David Cage games, they would probably just be miserable and stop playing the game after a very short amount of time, because the game sucks. It just sucks. However, because it's a community event, because it's a shared value that everyone is in on the joke and can participate in, they feel a sense of joy and euphoria over the prospect of playing the game or seeing the Cageisms appear in it. This is the feeling of hype. It's about being understood, knowing that people get your views, and those feelings of community enhance your enjoyment tenfold. Rather, they don't enhance anything. They are your primary source of enjoyment. This is not the fucking same as a remake being the same feeling as the original. It's just not the same feeling. It's a different kind of appeal. It's the feeling of hype, fan service, all the shit that you wouldn't get just by playing the original. Because the original isn't in on the joke. The original doesn't know that Cross-Dressing Cloud is a huge internet meme. It can't be in on the joke because the joke has yet to be written. The joke is created by the game being good enough to warrant memes of it being made by the fan base and the fan community and fan fictions being created around it. Just look at, good example. Look at, say, Tifa in this game. The fans love Tifa, and the general fan fiction that they've all adopted over time is the idea of Tifa being this martial arts god and born girl boss. But this is a fan fiction driven to public acceptance by people fangirling out over their shared love of the game, but not the actual game itself. Tifa in the original game starts the game weaker than every other party member. She's athletic enough to participate, but she's not particularly strong in the beginning. All of her stats are lower than Cloud's and Barrett's because she's mostly just a normal girl. That's the idea that she's always been this kick-ass fighter with abs of steel and, like, superior to all other human beings is purely a fan base morphing the character in their minds to be their ideal interpretation of them. The definition of fan fiction. FF7R is a game that canonizes that fan fiction. It's not the original. It doesn't feel like the original. The core appeals of the game is that you can fangirl out over the fan service and nods to shit that fans meme about or have in their own headcanons. It's not a huge change to the character, but it reflects this sort of appealing to fanfiction and popular headcanon. Yeah, they retconned it with, like, compilation garbage to reinforce this trope, but those are still all after FF7 was originally released. Those were all still appeals to fan fiction. To further clarify my previous statement about not being able to improve something that already exists, let's look at this game. The original FF7 had a lot of deeper themes beyond the obvious stuff about environmentalism. It's about personal identity, how Dionysian goals and Apollonian goals relate to each other, the significance of life. I'm sure you've all heard at least in passing about the famous story where Sakaguchi's mother passed away while he was working at Square, I believe while he was working on FF5, and he wrote a lot about FF7, or wrote a lot of FF7 around his thoughts and the ideas that he had through that personal experience. The idea of the life stream in the story and Eris influencing the world after she was gone were both things that he specifically stated were directly from his feelings towards his mother after she passed away, and that her life was influencing him from beyond the grave. These ideas can be found in a lot of the rest of the plot too. Barrett's plot line has a lot of revolving around his feelings towards humanity and his initial belief that the planet to be saved, like, people had to die. People like Shinra, who had abused the planet, just had to die. They had to not be there anymore. Reactors should be blown up and kill people in the process because their lives don't matter next to saving the planet from Shinra. But this is also tied to his ego and his personal grudge with Shinra, which clouds his judgment and allows him to do these bad things while believing it to be right. The game teaches Barrett that these people don't have to die for the world to be safe, which is why it's so fucking hilarious that there are still people that think the ending of FF7 implies that Holy wiped out humanity because it deemed humanity as harmful to the planet. If that was the message, that would render the entire plot of the game completely pointless, since all of your actions wouldn't have mattered in any way. Besides, you hear human laughter in the ending anyways. It's not really ambiguous. People were fine. Midgar was just abandoned. And if you wanted to get really stupid about it, Advent Children, which is supposed to be the canon in this timeline, confirms that no one died after the end of the original FF7. Literally everyone was fine, even by their own shitty spin-off logic. I have no idea what the fuck Kitase was high on when he went into one of those interviews and said with a fucking straight face, yeah, humanity got wiped out at the end of FF7. I guess he's just an idiot. But then, again, in Kingdom Hearts 2, Nomura literally writes that Sephiroth is, what was the quote? Goofy says it. He's like, isn't that the guy that's the darkness in Cloud's heart? Even though that's not even close to being what the story was. So I should really stop expecting these dipshits to actually understand what the fuck they even worked on. Nomura failing to follow basically anything in the front-facing plot of FF7 to the point where it seems like he literally never even played it. I can buy that. He was just a character designer guy who worked for his boss Sakaguchi, who told him how to make the game look. Kitase, I'm really baffled as to how he could sit and literally just contradict himself in interviews without blatantly noticing it. How has no one ever asked him in interviews, you say everyone died in FF7, but in Advent Children they're all still alive, and you're still calling that canon, so do you mind explaining that one, sport? But anyways, weird shit with the devs seeming to not even know the plots of the games and movies and books that they're including as canon in their own fucking works aside, let's look at FF7R. Does this game, does this story, communicate any of those ideas, any of those themes? Does it express the same deep emotional sentiment Sakaguchi had with his passed away loved ones? Sakaguchi does not work there anymore. I need to bring that up over and over and over again to remind the people who still somehow think that it's the same people working on the game. But anyways, so even if they tried to replicate it, could they? See, here's the problem. You could say, oh, it follows the spirit of the original, but who gets to decide that spirit? You? The original creator, Sakaguchi? The company with the legal ownership to make money off of it? Who gets to decide what is faithful or in spirit of the original? I certainly don't think that I certainly don't think that this game is remotely faithful. I know that shit like Advent Children isn't faithful. FF7 fans have told me this explicitly, that it didn't even understand the characters or the setting or the rules of the universe or the general tone of the game at all. And this game has a lot of Advent Children shit in it. I know this game doesn't seem like it's telling a narrative about the influence of life after death, or personal identity, or any of that shit, except just by how the fact that the surface-level plot elements are shared between this and the original. So how exactly is this game faithful? And why do you get to say that it is, if you think that it is? By the same logic, I guess I can't say that it is unfaithful, because I don't have the authority to make that decision for other people. I can only assume, using logical reasoning, that I can plainly see that it isn't even remotely telling the same story or the same themed narrative as the original, and that looking at this remake in a vacuum, I cannot actually see a point to it. As for the concept of remakes altogether, I'm somewhat biased. You see, what I described about how the appeal of this game is hype and fan service and memes, more than it is actual original content, that's all true. But I don't know if that's a bad thing or not. I personally have no desire to consume fan service as a product. However, I know that I'm in the minority on that front. I was very uninterested in, say, like, Endgame when that came out, because I didn't think it was anywhere near as good of a movie as Infinity War, but people seem to like it a lot for that reason, because fan service works on them, while I feel nothing, because I'm actively looking for things to praise. I see art in a very is it praiseworthy or not kind of way. When I look at, say, Cloud in FF7R, my mind doesn't go like, wowie, look at Cloud, he's in HD, oh shit. Yeah, I just think, well, all you did was take a character design that has existed for years and pay some 3D modelers to make a modern 3D model of it. That's not impressive at all. Other modern games actually have to come up with their own new designs for their characters, while you just get to lazily copy a design that already exists. As you can probably tell, this is pretty much my attitude for most things in FF7R. A middle schooler could have come up with this, just take the shit that already exists, read some fucking chat rooms, and understand what the accepted popular fan fiction of this is, and then make the fan fiction and throw money at it until it looks pretty. Wow, what brilliant artistry. So impressive. It must be so hard to write this shit. You know, remakes do not impress me. They inherently pass off the vast majority of creative work onto the original that they're copying. What annoys me is when people praise a remake for things that the original created. There's no reason to praise a remake for having something really obvious that the original had. Like, remove yourself from your bias and try to look objectively. Do you really think that it was difficult to make most of these scenes, like to write them? Do you really think that it was anything more than, well, we already have the characters, we know how the public believes that they act and talk and shit, we know what the public likes, we have the setting, now we just have to make it flashy and focus on the memes. All they have to do is just know what's popular in the largest percentage of the fan base, and that's it. Seriously, I've heard the most bizarre praises for this game while mindless simps surrounding it. It's such a fascinating case where you have people just look for any excuse to praise anything that they see. You have so many cases of shit like this where a simp is praising something that a million fucking other games already have and have done for years, but they only notice it in this game because of how much they feel the need to search for anything and everything to compliment. They will act like the most common and mundane of basic game design or level design or writing or anything added is something incredible and impressive without spending 2 seconds to critically think about what they're actually praising, and if they couldn't use the exact same logic to praise a dozen other things off the top of their head at other modern games. Speaking of bizarre praise for mundane shit, what about the additions? Don't they make the story better? Well, we already covered that, but there's no such thing as making a story better. A remake cannot replace the original. It cannot be consumed as new. It will always be consumed by comparing it to the original. I think it's just generally wrong to consume remakes while knowing that they are remakes, unless the point of the remake is to tell a fundamentally different story with similar elements. Like, you'll never be able to get the original out of your head unless you get brain damage or something and lose your memory of it. When you're hyper-fixating on the differences between two pieces of media, you tend to lose track of the bigger picture. Let's take, Biggs as an example in this game. In the original FF7, Biggs was not much of a character, and he dies really early on in the game with not a lot of total dialogue on him. In this game, he has, let me count, one personality trait. One trait, which he tells you outright, by the way. He literally just says in a conversation, this is my personality trait. That's the quality of this writing. They don't naturally present traits, they just have characters explicitly telling you, oh, I overthink things, because that's good writing, apparently. So here we have this character, who's really just a nothing guy, except for the few scenes where they barely remember that he tells you that he worries a lot, and then he's like, and then it's cartoonishly ham-fisted about it. Like, he just starts rambling in front of you about different possibilities of something, or the characters constantly mention that he has 20 different plans ahead of time. Did they bother to write and explain those 20 plans? Hell no. They just tell you that he had plans A through E as a, just for the fucking joke / ham-fisted forcing of the one personality trait that he has into your stupid fucking face. And then he dies. Except he doesn't die, but that might be in a parallel universe or some shit that I'll talk about later, so forget about that for now. But the point is, this is how it is consumed. To a brainwashed fanboy wearing their rose-colored glasses and fangirling out over all the fan service, indulging in the hype and the fan service appeal, refusing to look at anything critically or going out of their way to view everything as positive, looking for things to praise, even things that aren't really impressive at all, this would come across as an improved character, right? I mean, this Biggs has more going on than the original Biggs, so it's better, right? Wrong, you fucking idiots. I tricked you. Haha. Like I said, you're so focused on seeing what is different from the original as the basis of your critique. You aren't looking at the bigger picture. Even if this Biggs has more going on than the old one, is he actually a good character? Like, is he a character that adds to the narrative in a meaningful way? Is it a valuable overall to the greater themes, ideas, and the larger purposes of the narrative that we spent more time with this character? This Biggs is not a good character. He has one personality trait poorly and ham-fistedly shoved in your face. He's not an interesting character. If you were reading a story that it was only about this Biggs, it would not be an interesting story. And you only think it is because you think that it is more than the original, and more must automatically be better. Like I said in my gameplay video, you need to play to your strengths. They forced in content for us to waste time learning about a character that still, even after all the things they added, isn't actually interesting, rather than time that could have been spent developing things that are interesting. They took a 1 out of 10 character that doesn't pretend to be anything more than a 1 out of 10 character, and thus doesn't waste a lot of time on him in the original, and they turned him into a 1.5 out of 10 character that for some reason they think we give a shit about. I wouldn't watch a 1.5 out of 10 anime, would you? Jesse is the same. All of this shit is the same. Nothing they added is actually interesting or well-written enough for it to be worth viewing. It should have just been cut to save time. Oh wait, that's the original game. The one that knew what its strengths were. It simply allowed relatively uninteresting characters to fulfill their little roles in the story and not waste time that could have been spent on the deeper characters and the more interesting shit. You need to actually look at the bigger picture. If you think this is like good character writing because you really think that they did more than the original, again, ask yourself, well, how much did this game really add to the original? I mean, the original had like, what, 1 million fucking ideas that I could describe, go out of my way, and this game added, what, like 10 more ideas to that million? And then again, ask yourself, is this good compared to some totally different game? Like, is this character writing good compared to Night in the Woods? Or am I losing the bigger picture because I'm hyper-fixating on comparing this to the original and seeing what has been added and changed? And any change that I remotely find a way to praise, I choose to see in the best possible light. Jessie has the most shoved onto her, and yet still it's all either purely fan service or just like shit that goes nowhere. Jessie's personality traits are slightly more nuanced than like, say, Biggs or Wedge, but it's hard to tell that when 90% of her dialogue is just Cloud simping, like every other fucking character in the game. Let's see, she's bossy with her friends and bullies them around a little bit. She's constantly teasing and joking around, even if you're, like, murdering Shinra grunts on a bike, like, ending their lives and scarring their families when they find the corpses of their lost loved ones or whatever, all these fucking Shinra people you're murdering, and she's, like, cracking jokes and shit, which you would think she'd have some sympathy for them, like, the people you're slaughtering, being that her family works for Shinra until they decided that they were evil, so that's, you know, weird. Her mom, Jessie's mom, is such a tropey, stereotypical, like, wholesome mom type A cardboard cutout that it boggles the mind. You'd think that they'd at least try to make her seem like a little bit of a real person, but nope. And her dad is just a corpse. And according to the others, Jessie wants to blow up the reactors to save her dad's soul from damnation because I guess through unexplained magic bullshit logic, that's just what's happening. So, a MacGuffin, a story MacGuffin. Essentially, Jessie isn't even really resentful of Shinra or trying to help the planet that much. Her only established motivation is saving her dad's soul, and she's just kind of assuming, she doesn't even know, she's assuming that her dad's soul is trapped, and assuming that blowing up the reactors will untrap it, I guess. That's what we're told and expected to believe. Wedge says that her teasing Cloud is bullshit, but she also keeps up this teasing and simping while she's on the edge of dying, so I guess Wedge was full of shit, I'm supposed to believe? Or maybe it's some ham-fisted, like, oh, she was actually an earnest person who really did like Cloud after all. Aw, fucking garbage. And she used to want to be an actress when she was growing up. Oh, quickly, want to point out, they could have done anything. They could have done anything to state that she left her career in order to join Avalanche, but they chose to say that it just so happened that on the night of her very first leading role in a play, the very night, they randomly fucking happened to be the exact same day that her dad got sick. There was literally no reason to make it that contrived, but somehow they took something that should have been fine and made it unbelievable and stupid. Amazing writing. Notice something about all of these things that I mentioned with Jessie. That's right, they all go nowhere. They're just random details, quote-unquote, that basically mean nothing to the actions or meaning of the character. Her dad got sick, so she's fighting Shinra. 1, this is hardly, like, somehow more tragic than anyone else. I mean, Biggs and Wedge don't even have family anymore. We can only assume that they died or left. 2, this doesn't alter her character or change the meaning of any of her actions. Regardless of these additions, she's still just character with tragic past trying to fight Shinra to do good / fulfill her own motivation. The same as everyone else when you break it down. The note of her wanting to be an actress also isn't used to do anything with her character. At most, it's used as a justification for why she's teasing and flirty. And to be fair, I've done a lot of drama in my schooling, and everyone who's into drama is constantly pretend flirting with every other member of the drama club, so I can buy that. But the only other purpose behind this note is that it's just a little extra note of tragedy that she had a dream but she gave it up. That's it. But, like, it's not like this is used to show that she's unhappy in her daily life. Kind of the whole conceit of Avalanche is that they're a bunch of nobodies getting in over their heads, way too confident in their abilities to stop Shinra and save the world, and they all fail and die. And also, inadvertently, they bring a whole bunch of people down with them, thanks to bringing attention to the slums and getting Shinra to drop the plate and kill a whole bunch of fucking people down there, ending up doing more harm than good. Let me give you a quick example off the top of my head where details like this actually matter to the story and characterization. Take Sarah Lynn from BoJack Horseman. It's stated multiple times throughout the series that Sarah Lynn wanted to be an architect when she was growing up, but as a child star in a famous sitcom with a mother who was very exploitative of her daughter and her acting career, and a sexually abusive stepfather, she became wrapped up in the Hollywood lifestyle. After living so much of her life under the validation of millions of fans and their praise, she, like many celebrities in the series such as BoJack, continued to seek out that validation from her fans. She'd had a taste of fame since she was a child, and she can't function in a normal lifestyle anymore without the constant validation from others. Her lifestyle just went in a direction where she became more and more famous, and once she was getting too old to be loved for her youthful public persona, she was getting replaced with newer celebrities and fresher faces. She lacked the attention and validation she relied on, and moved into substance abuse instead. Sarah Lynn, having wanted to be an architect as a child, has a purpose in the story. It's a detail that matters and means something in how the character is represented in the story and what messages the character communicates. It represents her being steered from her true passions by the authority figures around her that exploited her. It represents things like that things didn't have to be this way, that she could have lived a normal, healthy life. Sure, you could pretend like Jessie in FF7R is representing something similar, but the fact is that the story isn't using any of these elements or details to really make a larger point or say anything with her character. Any conclusions about Jessie's characterization you could draw from observing her life, according to this game, are things that you'd have to draw independently from what the story actually has to tell you. They don't make a clear point with any of it. They don't do anything with it. They just make shit up, tell you it, and move on, clearly under the mindset of, oh, if we add more details, it's automatically better. We shove in more backstory and more details, they must automatically result in a better character and a better story. I want you to really put yourself in the bigger picture and think about this. Let's look at an early example. Say you were tasked with expanding, quote-unquote, the story and general presentation of the original FF7. Right away. After leaving the bombed reactor, you're going through town, and while things are in chaos, what would you, fair game director, choose to do in this remake? It's not a trick question, it's very simple, Occam's razor style. The simplest explanation is the most likely one. The most painfully obvious thing that you could do to expand this from the original is to drag out a segment where you force the player to look at the destruction and damage caused from the reactor blowing up. What is the most direct and obvious way of accomplishing this? Well, you see things that were destroyed or shit falling apart. You see generic nameless NPCs crying generically about generic obvious shit like, oh, the big problem economically, this might have hurt and killed some people, oh shit. If that's the answer you came up with for how to expand the original, then congratulations. You have the same capabilities, creatively speaking, as these chodes that made this remake. Therefore, you should have gotten their jobs, and you deserve to get paid as much as they do for their fucking contributions. See, that's the problem. Your big addition to this game was the most mindless, brain-dead, obvious thing you could have possibly done to expand a thing that already exists. Yet people will still praise you for this brain-dead ass contribution that a fucking 8-year-old could have come up with. This could have been made on an assembly line without human input, this section immediately after the first bombing. And AI could have come up with this amazing contribution to the story. It's not impressive. It's not worthy of praise. And in fact, it's debatable on whether or not this is even worthwhile content at all. Yes, rose-colored glasses will let you view basically anything in the world as good if you choose to tell yourself that it's good, but actually thinking critically, more is rarely ever better in storytelling. What does this add to the narrative? Is it emotional weight? No, you've just started a story. You don't give a fuck about these characters or anything so far. Emotional impact has to come from building up emotional investment. You can't just make dramatic shit happen out of nowhere and expect people to care. If all you had to do to achieve emotional investment and catharsis, writers would just, like, have sad, dramatic shit happen to nameless, nothing characters you don't even know all the fucking time and do nothing else. Because they wouldn't need to. I know some writers actually literally do this. And there are certain people that are so easy to emotionally manipulate that they get invested in the most underdeveloped, nothing characters at the drop of a hat. But I'd like to think that at least most people have a slightly higher standards than that. In the original game, you were already informed by NPCs you could speak to that this was a huge disaster and that tons of people died. Yes, the original game confirms that people died, which this game is weirdly reluctant to do. I guess maybe because some of the ratings board things, since they also refuse to have blood in this game, like was in the original, with the trail of blood following Genova left in her wake. Now it's just like magic bubbling Genova juice on the ground. But anyways, they talk about the scale of the damage and the harm to bystanders. You are aware of that. It caused chaos and hardship. You are explicitly told the body count. You already fucking knew that in the original game. This edition in this remake doesn't add to that. It doesn't inform you of anything valuable that means anything to the story. The original also had more moral ambiguity immediately struck, unlike this remake, where they just straight away fucking retcon it and tell you that everything bad that ever happens to anyone is the result of Shinra being evil, and not because Avalanche is a morally ambiguous organization doing bad shit. This game tells you right away, before it even blows up, don't worry, no intrigue, no moral questions here, this was just evil people doing a evil thing, and they blew up their own reactor and increased the size of the explosion. Wow, how insightful. So, nothing has actually been added of value, it's just removing things of value. And it stretches the length of the game out needlessly. See, this is a problem. People just assume more is better when they're trying to go out of their way to praise or make excuses for something they want to view as good because they've decided to be fans of it. The argument that this makes you feel the weight and destruction is such a laughably fucking awful argument. By that logic, anything, no matter how ham-fisted it is, how much it beats you over the head with something that you already understand, must automatically be better, because it's shoving something down your throat more thoroughly. By this logic, subtlety in writing would never be a benefit at all, because you could just make something more blatant, and that would would make you feel it more. Fucking terrible logic from people who know nothing about writing. This is something that I've talked about before in the past, but this is the best example I can give of this concept. The expanding the original, quote-unquote, that is. Let's look at a real quick case study of that concept. Let's talk about the way people in Midgard dress. Very simple. This is the go-to I always use in this particular game. In the original game, how would you assume regular people in Midgard dress? You see what Cloud wears, you see what Barrett, Tifa, Eris, all those people wear because the more detailed artwork they get, you get an idea of what, say, various Shinra characters wear, and to be fair, they all look very different from each other. From weird steampunk shit like Cloud's rebar, shoulder pads, and gloves, to other simple yet punk clothing like Tifa wears, you get a sense of the style, and the variety of that style, to the, like, weirdly extravagant shit that, like, Hayden, whatever his name it wears. So, say you're making additional FF7 content, and you want to expand the world. Like adding lore or mythos to it. In this game, you see a lot more people, and you see them in HD graphics. So this is an opportunity to see more of the various styles that people would dress in this city and this universe, right? You're going to see some more weird shit like what Cloud and Tifa wear, or other flamboyant shit like some of the topside people wear, like Scarlet wear, so on, whatever. But in this game, what do we actually see? With this opportunity to expand the world by being able to see way more NPCs, way more people. The Shinra employees just tend to wear suits and generic business attire that basically look no different to how they dress office workers in a setting that isn't even steampunk or fantasy at all, which isn't exactly fucking riveting. And most of the other NPCs you see just wear the same tired-looking, boring, drab, fucking simple clothing. It doesn't look steampunk. It doesn't look like someone sat down and thought, how would people look in this universe? They look like fucking generic leftover assets from literally any other video game. Not only does this completely fail to expand the universe, because they didn't actually bother to, come up with ideas to fucking fill that expansion in any way near the level of quality that the original game did for the content that it showed, it actively makes the universe feel fake. Now, I sit there through this setting and I think, why do the main characters dress and look completely different from literally every other character that I see, every other person on the street? No one else walks around with a prosthetic arm like Barrett or anything that seems like similar technology for military or medical purposes. Off the top of my head, that'd be an incredibly easy expansion to make, but they couldn't even come up with that because if they think of more than one minor idea every year, their brains just short-circuit or something over there. You go to Jessie's house and her mother thinks that they're all stagehands that work at a theater she says that whilst they're sitting around the table wearing ammo pouches and belts and armor that no one else that you see in the game wears. How could I not be bursting with laughter at that part? Let's look at it from the standpoint of NPC optional dialogue around the environments. You hear a bunch of people saying a couple lines around maybe these 4 of these town segments in the game. A lot of really incredibly brain-dead, stupid, troglodyte dipshits say that this makes the world feel more real and lived in. But if anything, this extra dialogue from these cardboard cutout stale milk NPCs just makes the universe feel artificial and bullshit. The only thing they ever talk about is shit that you're already familiar with, to an absurd degree. You go around a town and you hear nothing but people talking about Biggs, Wedge, Wall Market, just everything that the original game has. The original game made it clear that these were just small parts of a larger city of Midgar that had way more shit in it than you actually end up seeing. And the world as a whole. But this game makes it feel like everything you've seen in FF7 is basically all that exists and all that matters in Midgar because it's all anyone ever talks about. There is one nameless NPC in the entire game I saw with even halfway decent dialogue, and it's some random kid that starts shit-talking Cloud when you walk by him. I believe his lines are something like, "Wait, do you keep that look on your face because you think it's cool, loser?" And, "Oh, you look like you're having a bad day, you should go back to sleep." Other than that, 99% of the side dialogue from side characters you hear in this game just consists of the most ham-fisted shit you've ever heard, where it becomes plainly obvious that none of these NPCs are even remotely human. They're just plastic mannequins waiting around for the narrator to shove its fist up their ass and work their mouths like a fucking sock puppet. talking about, like, the train graveyard because you know what that is, talking about the honeybee because you, the player, know what that is, talking about some side quest bullshit where you go and kill some random monster in a junkyard, talking about Eris because she's the only person in existence, apparently, based on how no one else seems to have anything else to talk about. Other than direct references just for the ham-fisted sake of shitty fan service that these are obviously for, there's just the other ham-fisted NPC dialogue, again, telling you the obvious shit, beating you over the head with everything that a fucking grade schooler could already understand. Like, some mannequin NPC that obviously isn't a real person because their entire life exists purely for the sake to scream at the player, hey, did you know that the people don't trust Wu-Tai? Here, listen to this guy saying he doesn't trust Wu-Tai. Did you hear that, player? Did you hear that he doesn't trust Wu-Tai? Here, let me say it again. You didn't catch that. This expansion, quote-unquote, does not add to the feel of the setting. It only makes the setting seem like nonsense because it seems like there's no thought put into the setting at all, and nothing exists other than what is relevant to the plot and fan service. Expanding my fucking ass. There is no creativity to any of this. They didn't fill the world with a bunch of new ideas like is actually necessary to expand upon something. They just bloated the world and filled it with the same fucking things slamming you over and over in the head endlessly. The only thing they really add to the universe is a bunch of out-of-place generic, like, serious, so fucking generic. I cannot believe how tropey and generic they are. Side quests and side quest NPC characters. There are all these cardboard cutout caricatures living in the slums, and they're all, like, weirdly happy. They're weirdly upbeat, when I thought the whole point of the story was this harsh class divide between below and above plate, lower class, upper class, and how Shinra sucks and everything blows asshole for the poor. But because the people who wrote all the side quests don't have the smallest nugget of writing talent at all, they're all just generic happy-go-lucky stories about boring-ass Mary Sue NPCs and one big happy family slums situations where everything is a boring-ass hero good guy looking out for everyone else, and they all just seem more than content with their lives as is. Like, why the fuck are the slums so upbeat in all the side quests? It's bafflingly jarring. I was originally going to complain about the butchering of Sephiroth, especially the trend that I hate of Sephiroth wanting to suck Cloud's dick all the time. Even though in the original game, Sephiroth didn't even know who Cloud was at first, didn't give a fuck about him, only viewed him as one of his Genova cell bodies that he could control as it suited him, not even worthy of disposing of. However, based on other shit about this game's ending, I'm led to understand that this Sephiroth is not the majority of the times you see Sephiroth in this game, or all the times, are not the Sephiroth from the original game, or even the fake Sephiroths from the original game, but rather like a time traveler. So I guess having not seen Advent Children and how badly that probably butchers Sephiroth's character, I'll put a pin in that. I've talked before about how much I hate this version of Sephiroth we get in all this modern shit where he just won't shut the fuck up about scissoring Cloud's boy pussy, and how that's not at all how Sephiroth acted in the original. But then I thought, well, the time travel shit means that this is like, Advent Children Sephi. His personality won't be the same in the original. But then I remembered that a lot of what you see of Sephi in this game is Cloud's hallucination of him, which, again, makes it make no sense. Like, if that's the explanation for why Sephiroth is obsessed with Cloud because he's from the future, then the old Sephi should still be as he was in the original. If that's the case, then Cloud should, by this point, never have seen Sephi acting in this way or talking about Cloud like they have any relationship at all. So it still doesn't explain why Cloud's own hallucinations of Sephi do involve this weird Cloud simping, unless these visions of Sephiroth are not just natural hallucinations, but were actually specifically crafted by the time-traveling Sephi from the future. This is what I find to be the most likely situation, but I'll have to explain that later when I'm talking about the time travel shit. Regardless, I still hate this version of Sephiroth, and I can't take him seriously as a character when he's such a middle schooler's fanfiction by this point. Above time, above space, the wokest, most black-pilled motherfucker who ever lived, who also just really likes Cloud for basically no given reason because of the eternal rivalry. I fucking hate it, but whatever. Looking at this, as a fresh narrative, but keeping in mind the references and what they would imply, this story is even less coherent from a basic storytelling point of view. There's so many elements to this story that don't make sense if you don't separate the original content from spin-off retcons and from the new shit. Like, just think about this narrative with the context of the retconned Avalanche, for example, where the HQ of Avalanche is a larger organization than Barrett's cell that do these bombings. For one, they're basically two completely different groups that don't really collaborate or speak with each other, so I'm not sure how Barrett can even consider himself an offshoot of Avalanche. But the point is, this makes the story fucking weird. If Avalanche is an anti-Shinra organization, why doesn't anyone mention them? Shinra only responds to the actions of Barrett's group, except in the very opening cutscene where he says this is the group that made a take on your life, and that was also in the trailers. Anyways, and it seems like Barrett is the only one doing anything at all, aside from the very beginning, or what I just said, which is probably just a shitty retcon that I'm not familiar with, most certainly. If Avalanche HQ had Mayor Domino on their side and apparently way more manpower and military-grade equipment than Barrett's cell, somehow, why do they do nothing except show up in the weird Jesse side story just to tell you that they do indeed exist? And now apparently Yuffie is like working with them, so like the Shinra telling everyone that Avalanche is a Wutai puppet group wasn't even a fucking lie, apparently? Even though when Barrett confronts President Shinra about having their names cleared in terms of being associated with Wutai, he doesn't mention this at all or refute that, which implies that the thing was obviously the original intention, right? That Shinra was lying about Avalanche being a Wutai puppet just to associate Avalanche, i.e. Barrett's group, with something the general public would hate, being Wutai, and Nomura or whoever just fucking changed their minds later and decided that Avalanche actually should be a Wutai agent cell. What about, say, Jesse and the others? Were they originally part of this larger organization, but they joined Barrett's more extreme splinter group? I don't see this version of Wedge leaving an organization that has more power and doesn't want to hurt civilian lives to go and join Barrett's smaller organization with fewer resources and thus less chance of accomplishing anything, and also the only defining factor that separates the smaller organization is that they're way more violent and don't care as much about civilian casualties. Would this Wedge really join that group if he could have just joined the Avalanche HQ? And those are their words, not mine. They fucking describe Avalanche HQ as anti-Shinra, but they don't want to hurt civilians in the process. This is especially true for Tifa. She's introduced as someone who wants to save the planet, but she doesn't agree with the bombings and violence. Pretty much explicitly, by definition, she shouldn't be in this group. If a less violent version of Avalanche exists, she should be with Avalanche HQ. Adding this HQ retcon to the story inherently makes Tifa's characterization complete nonsense. And like I said, they apparently do nothing. Even when the name Avalanche is dragged through the mud because of Barrett's actions, they don't do anything to separate themselves from Barrett's group. They're just this weird nebulous organization hanging around in the background that should, by all accounts of who they are and the resources that they have, they should matter more to a story about the little guy fighting back against big bad Shinra, but they don't. See what I mean? The story has this weird other component that doesn't really fit very well into the context of the story, and it makes the whole thing messy and scattered and creates a bunch of contradictions. Look at the crux of this story. Whatever you think the appeal or the thrust or the point of the story is, the most important components and plot events and contributing factors. Is there any need for Avalanche HQ to exist in this story at all? No, obviously it didn't exist in the original. It's a retcon. It could have been easily cut from this game without the crux of the narrative changing, because the crux of the narrative is still following the original for the most part, or this dumbass time ghost shit, neither of which have anything to do with the Avalanche retcon. I know this is obvious to anyone with a brain, and I didn't need to spend this much time clarifying it, but this Avalanche HQ stuff is not the result of them having a complex and interesting story to tell that involves and requires Avalanche HQ in some way. No. It was simply referenced a few times because it's a fan service homage to whatever fucking garbage spin-off game introduced that retcon. The same is true for basically all of the other retcons or additions, like the Chadley, the other guy who runs the Honeybee that I'm forgetting the name of, Leslie, Kyrie, all the horrible, awful side quest shit, all of it. At best, they mean nothing and could have been cut out entirely so as not to waste so much of your time and not make the story messier and less focused. At worst, they insult your intelligence to watch and actively create narrative problems and plot holes. The only alteration that even remotely has some narrative value is the increased focus on Wutai. Now, they don't do a whole lot with the Wutai shit they bring up in this game, and yeah, I worded it that in the way that I meant it. Obviously, anything that they bring up but don't actually do anything with, such as Avalanche HQ, Wutai, or even pretty much the Time Ghosts, don't actually do anything in this story, since the game ends without the characters having actually changed that much yet, and it affecting the plot significantly yet. So even all of that still falls under the umbrella of shit that has yet to affect the actual overarching plot in a meaningful way, and they might do stuff with it in later games, or they might not. But yeah. Of course, they can still do something with these plot elements later on, but since this was a full game release, not like a TV episode or a chapter of a manga, it's only fair that we judge them for what they have, and not the worthless promise that they might do something with these ideas in the future. Regardless, yeah, the Wutai shit still hasn't substantially influenced the narrative in ways that couldn't have been removed entirely, but at the very least, putting more focus on Wutai is a retcon that actually fits within the narrative. You know the famous quote about how writing or acting is behaving truthfully under imaginary circumstances? Well, I'm pretty partial to this way of looking at writing. And I would say that this one tiny addition to the story actually qualifies as acting truthfully under the imaginary circumstances of this setting and this narrative. It makes perfect sense for Shinra to attempt to gain back public favor and oust Avalanche by accusing them of being part of a nation that they're technically still within a Cold War with violence between the nations having ceased only recently. Wutai would still be a hot-button issue amongst the citizens of Midgar, so yeah, I'm fine with this. This is the one thing they did that at least makes a little bit of sense and fits within the overarching story and isn't just some random distraction from the elements of the story that actually matter. And that's just one example of the weird tangents that are added that only make the story messier and less focused, and feel like they don't belong in the story at all. Even the Time Ghost thing doesn't belong. It's very weird how little the characters talk about it or seem to care about the Time Ghosts up until right at the very end, where it suddenly becomes the focal point. They added this incredibly strange natural phenomenon the characters should know is only affecting them and that other people can't see the ghosts, and they're super weird, and they're also actively causing problems throughout the story, so it doesn't make sense for them to ignore the ghosts and just never talk about them very much. But because the game needs to mostly follow the same path as the original, they just fucking shut up about it and don't talk about the ghosts, only briefly mentioning it here and there in case you happen to forgot. And that's as much as they actually react to this weird shit going on. Oh, I almost forgot to mention this, but I guess this counts as a narrative thing rather than a gameplay thing, but the animations in this game look fucking awful. They look so stupid. In the original game, obviously, you're seeing, like, big animations because it's clear that they need to have the body language be very extreme as a metaphor to communicate to you how a character's behaving with the low poly count characters flailing their arms around and stuff like that. In this, you're seeing characters with high detail bodies, faces, and voices, but they still move around like this when they talk.
Marl, got some filters for ya.
Tifa, my dear, dear girl.
Oh, what's he doing here?
Working?
Be nice. Cloud's helping me with collections.
You'd better take care of her.
I'm pretty good at taking care of myself, you know.
That I do. Still, better him than you. No charm, no wit. Big sword, but no skills.
I've got skills.
Be nice.
I'm doing my best.
You're looking awfully glum. Are you getting enough sleep? A good long rest to cure anything, I tell you.
A tried and true lesson for life on the ground floor. Am I right?
That you are. Now, your money.
Thanks, Marl. You take care of
This is only off-putting and could not possibly look stupider. Just, like, fucking stop doing this. It looks like shit. People who don't have Tourette's syndrome don't move like this when they talk. I'm not sure if you've ever seen a human being communicate before, but this is a pretty poor attempt to capture it. Now, surprisingly, I'm not saying it's all awful, horrible garbage. I am clarifying that there's no such thing as an improved version of an experience, there are only new experiences, and this game has a new purpose that the original didn't have, and the original had purposes for what to express through its art, and also in what innovations to bring to gaming that this game does not innovate fucking anything at all, and I don't think it expresses anything at all either, at least not that I can see, and no one who likes the game has devised a compelling analytical case for what this game might be expressing, but hey, let's give it the benefit of the doubt. In fact, let's do that right now. My best guess for what this game is expressing, if anything, is some meta-concept. There's a ton of dialogue in this game pertaining to the concept of reunion, from Sephiroth talking about the Genova reunion, obviously, to the flowers and pendant that symbolize reunion said in multiple totally different side stories, and just on a meta level, the concept of the fan base of the game having a reunion with these characters in this setting and these elements of this plot. What this is being used to express about the fans and their relationship to this setting, I couldn't tell you. Again, the evidence doesn't really suggest anything as far as I can see. Any deeper interpretation than this is something that would be based off of shaky evidence at best. Now, I don't see how the concept of reunion could have anything to do with the time travel shit. I guess reunion with the past for the characters who are here from the future, that's a big stretch, though. Oh, yeah. I was gonna say what isn't awful about the game. Like I said, I cannot really judge the fan service hype factor appeal of this game, which is the primary appeal, because fan service as a product doesn't appeal to me. Like I was saying with Endgame, that movie is mostly fan service, and as such, it doesn't work on me. I don't enjoy watching it. It's not like I don't like the feeling of hype or fan service in general, but I do a good job of clearing my emotional biases when looking at media, and I look at what its merits are. Yeah, if I like a story, I'll like to see memes of that story. Like, I love seeing Parasite memes. That's probably my current favorite right now on Twitter, because I get the same feeling that everyone else gets of, obviously, oh yeah, other people get it, you know? That makes the meme better. But when a company tries to sell me a meme, or that feeling, then I don't fucking buy into it. I'm not like, yeah, but I paid for this, so I could see what you have to offer, not just so that you could fucking remind me of something that I already know that I like. I don't know, man. I just can't consume fan service and enjoy it as a product. So, if people like the game because of that feeling of fan service and hype, I find it difficult to judge that, personally. My instinct is to say, that's bullshit, you're just being emotionally manipulated to extract money from your wallet for something that didn't take real creativity or talent to make, and all that's true. Well, the emotional manipulation part isn't true. I've talked about that in other videos, but it is true that, like, this did not take creativity or talent to create. But at the end of the day, people still have a good time and enjoy this content, even if I feel the praise is undeserved by the creators, who are basically just reaping the rewards of Sakaguchi's talent. Hell, again, even if Sakaguchi was working on this game, I still wouldn't support lazily just making minor fucking assembly line type changes to a game that already exists. I'm not gonna fucking pay twice for something. I won't pay you again for the same fucking story. But knowing Sakaguchi, I doubt that he would ever want to work on a remake in the first place. He's too, like, batshit insane with the idea of innovation. Also, fuck remakes. Make something original instead of lazy, soulless cash grabs, you fucking assholes. But I think if I were to judge this as a remake, as a collection of fan service and fan fiction, which is a genre I already don't respect, I would say that I think the only clever thing they do in this game is with the house boss. the Hell House, because it's the only thing that I think actively plays on the understanding that people will be consuming this, constantly looking for the changes between it and the original. So people would inherently be waiting to see the house enemy. You'd go through the part of the game where the house enemy used to spawn in the original, not find any, and assume that it's not going to be in the remake at all, and think, oh well, but then you'll be blindsided slightly later on as it's revealed to actually still be in the game as a more substantial boss fight. I think out of all the things of being a remake and playing with the concept of hype and fan service and expectations, that was the one thing in the entire game where, looking back, I can say, yeah, that was kind of clever. Everything else just feels like it was made on an assembly line. The side quests are all horrible, the writing is horrible, the writing is trite, simplistic, ham-fisted, and awful. There is not a good side quest, narratively speaking. Back to a little bit of praise. The main cast is pretty okay. The dialogue is mostly good. The dialogue can be good. The interactions sometimes have charm to them. They don't come across like the ham-fisted shit stains written by an 8-year-old the same way that the side quests do and a lot of the other new content. Sorry, an 8-year-old working on an assembly line for minimum wage. But yeah, they clearly put all their effort into making the main cast feel charming and likable and more like the original and less like weird mutants from Advent Children. So it's still not super praiseworthy because they're just still copying characters that already exist and personalities and ideas for how they should act. So more than half of the work that goes into this has already been done for them by the people who made the original. But still, it's worth pointing out when charming interactions and dialogue are written, because not enough people notice the difference between good and bad dialogue in moment-to-moment interactions, but it makes a really big difference when a writer is able to make basic speech compelling and entertaining in some way. Oh, some people like to say, oh, it's impressive because they managed to capture the characters and how they act accurately. You are a dumb person and you should feel bad. Seriously, fuck off, okay? No, I'm not impressed unless you're a grade schooler. I won't be impressed by you just because you have the basic mental awareness and sanity to look at a character and grasp their surface level traits and behaviors. If you didn't understand that Cloud was a pretend edgelord out for attention while being a socially awkward loser in the original, you literally just weren't paying attention while playing the game. No, it does not fucking impress me when writers can capture a character enough for fans who already view it through rose-colored glasses, mind you, to be able to view him as the same one they already know. What does impress me is how incompetent one has to be to make something like Advent Children, where the characters are that wrong, despite having reference material to work off of. Out of new original content, there is not a lot I have any praise for. Almost all of it doesn't really mesh with the main story. They're just side stories that could be cut entirely without anything in the overarching message or themes or narrative being affected. Again, especially because this game doesn't seem to have any actual organized point to it. I didn't dislike Madam M, was the one new character that was made. She also could have been cut entirely from the game without the core of it being affected at all. There's no reason for her to be a returning character or anything, but at the very least, I found her slightly more charming and likable, unlike basically everyone else that they added. The second sewer section is awful, but I liked the scene with Corneo and Leslie. It doesn't make any sense, because Corneo literally says, I'll be lucky to survive another week, and then just a few seconds later he says, I've already won, in referencing to him revealing his plan. But, like, the plan that he just revealed is already over. He blew it. He fucked up. It won't happen. So, like, the statement of, like, villains like me only reveal their plans when they think they've already won absolutely makes no sense in this context. But at the very least, I like this scene for the charm of the characters and the fact that Corneo comes across as a smart, like, he's able to perceive treachery ahead of time and worm his way out of trouble in a manner that doesn't come across like contrived bullshit. Again, it's not about making the original better. That's a Sisyphean task in the first place. That's not how consuming media works at all. But just as purely new additions, I like these. They were entertaining to watch, unlike most of the new shit, which was agonizing and cringeworthy to sit through, or otherwise just felt like writing off an assembly line, like I said. Like Jessie's side story, her generic tragic backstory with her non-character dad and her cookie-cutter mom whose only trait is being a generic wholesome mom who cooks nice and says nice things. Wow, what fucking human drama. Now, as for things I like in the story, the number one thing is probably Barrett, I would say. Obviously, I like, say Eris, but Eris is just the way she is because it's copying all the good ideas of the original, nothing more. I liked Eris in the original, so. But, whereas this version of Barrett is actually very different, personality-wise, from the original, and most of the stuff that I liked about Barrett in this game were actually original to his character here. Barrett has a ton of charisma, and he's the only character that consistently has good lines and good dialogue, not cringeworthy shit. The original game always implied that Barrett was in the wrong throughout his actions in Midgar, but in this game, it more or less treats Barrett like he's always in the right, and like he's the most mature, like, maybe not mature, but like he has his head on right. The only part of the story that seems remotely judgmental of Avalanche as a whole is the mission at the very beginning, and even then, that's not actually being judgmental of Avalanche because they retconned it so that Shinra caused all the destruction that happened to everyone, so all of our fucking dumbass heroes can be stainless Mary Sues with no moral ambiguity at all. This change to Barrett annoyed me at first, but I actually do like this version of the character. He's honestly cool. He's actually cool, and he has a strong ability to manage other people's emotions and use, like, positive logic to turn it into productivity with, like, himbo energy. He seems like the kind of person that would actually be a talented leader. Oh yeah, I like the random nameless Shinra employee on the train, the weak salaryman guy that had the balls to stand up to the fucking, like, aggressive behemoth of a guy waving a gun in his face.
We will not submit to intimidation or violence, but work together for peace and prosperity. That is how civilized people change the world!
That's right!
That is the Shinra Creed!
Them's fighting words.
It's what we believe. We all have to follow our conscience, don't we?
Like, what a fucking cool guy. This is the kind of hero that I can get behind. He's reasonable, he's passionate, but at the same time, his views are respectful of Barrett's right to hold a different position. He's just a fucking Chad. Other things I liked. I liked the meme image of you guys are in for a world of hurt plastered over top of the Tonberry on that one side quest. That's pretty funny. It's nice that the game has at least one joke, one original joke that isn't awful or just copying from the original. And, or both at the same time, as most of them are. Actually, now that I think about it, 3 jokes. I don't personally think Cloud's hand massage is very funny. It's just a really simplistic slapstick scene. I've seen pretty much the exact same joke and scene play out in 1,000 times before in other media. But it's not inherently bad, so it's fine. Rude's spare glasses, his spare pairs of shades over and over were amusing. Granted, again, I still wouldn't call Rude having multiple pairs of shades an original joke. I've definitely seen that joke quite a few times in other media as well. But it wasn't as played out as everything else the game tried with its half-assed attempts at charm and comedy. And at least it wasn't more fucking, like, FF7 fanservice fanfiction meme shit. How can I explain what bothers me so much about this sort of fanservice meme writing to someone who doesn't feel the same vitriol towards it that I do? I mean, I enjoy memes like everyone else when they're authentic. A fan base generates memes. Or perhaps they're just responding to comedy or charm that was already intended by the original creation. When a spin-off of something, typically with different core writers/directors, tries to write fan service, it tends to, be fucking awful. Fan service as a whole is just an excuse to remind you of things that you already like, instead of actually making something new for you to like. But some fan service is, like, fine for people that like it, and some of it is just shameless. Here, an example that's irritated me even more recently than FF7R. Let's take a little side journey and look at a simplistic joke from Persona 5 Strikers, the shitty, mindless warrior-style spin-off game. There are a dozen shitty attempts at comedy in this by just copy and pasting memes from the internet, but I want to focus on one in particular to make my point and really examine why it sucks ass. And how it doesn't work as actual comedy. It only works on people who want to fucking liquid inject fan service, quote-unquote, into their veins.
Sorry about that. We just despised the police is all. It's kind of weird when you say it with a smile like that.
Now, for context, in the original game, Haru is mostly an earnest yet determined and sweet-natured girl. One of the community's most common jokes regarding this character stems from a couple of lines in the game, and I mean really a couple, like 4 or 5 lines from the entire game, that come across as odd in contrast with her innocent attitude. And it's not like I'm saying they're minimized, they're definitely on purpose, but here.
Take my chocolate, please, before I crush it.
Now, this is a huge meme by this point, but in the original game, this was not a very prominent character trait. What made the community latch onto this joke of Haru being, like, sociopathic or violent-natured in some way is the fact that it wasn't ever pushed by the game. It's just 4 or 5 lines out of a script that has literally hundreds of thousands of lines in it. And that subtlety made the meme thrive. People latch onto the contrast and the fact that these strange lines are never explained or justified by the characterization of Haru, which is what makes it a good joke. It's not that there couldn't potentially be an explanation to rationalize her normal behavior with these odd lines, and obviously the game was never actually implying that Haru was putting on a facade with her normal sweet-natured personality. But then, the community latches onto this joke, it becomes a huge meme, and they want to keep making money off of the IP, so they make some Warriors game, slap P5 on it so that it will sell better, and instead of, like, writing their own fucking jokes for it, they just copy and paste this meme. It's not subtle, it's slapping you in the face. The entire joke is literally just, hey player, you know that meme that you've already heard about Haru being a sociopath? Yeah, I don't really actually have a joke to make with that, I just want you to remember that meme, and, you know, let you know that I've also seen the meme, which is why I slapped it into the script with no cleverness, no wit, nothing. What do you think of that, player? In this half-assed attempt at comedy, just by trying to remind you of a meme, presents a whole slew of new problems. Like, see, now this new guy, whatever the fucking name is in this scene in Strikers, he responds to Haru's bizarre line. In the original game, no one ever comments on any of the weird shit Haru says. It isn't meant to be taken like Haru somehow scares people, or Haru is aloof and lacks the social awareness to realize when she's being off-putting. The very fact that he's responding to this line from Haru changes the characterization and the way that it comes across. Not only is it not funny, because at best, it's just copying a joke that already exists, only without the subtlety of the original joke. Now, it's actively changing the tone of the character to feel like something that Haru was never intended to be. This is not fucking funny, this is lazy. This is just a hack writer looking at a character that already exists and thinking, I'll just identify maybe 2 or 3 surface-level personality traits, probably misunderstanding them in the process, and then just shove those in the audience's face over and over and over and over and over, and act like that is somehow being faithful to the character, and even if it was, it's still not like writing new shit for the character, it's not compelling. I seriously don't get how people can just be told things that they already believe and then burst out laughing. Like, I already know that Rude likes Tifa. Rude in FF7R does something that suggests that he likes Tifa. Bursts into tears, laughing, crying. Fucking, guys, it's not witty, it's not funny. It's literally just the same joke you were already aware of. The same joke that you already tell each other. They just took a joke that already existed and fucking told it to you again with no extension, no wit, no modification of any kind. They just reminded you of a joke you already like. They didn't tell a fucking good joke. Now let's talk about that specific instance too, why not? In the original game, Rude doesn't attack Tifa in combat, and much later on there's dialogue where he clarifies that he likes Tifa. Again, people latch onto this because it's subtle. It's not like a huge thing that the narrative is pushing. At least him not attacking her in combat is subtle. It's easily missable by a lot of players. This sort of rarity makes this more appealing to fans because, again, when it's something subtle, it allows people to entertain themselves by filling in the gaps in their minds. That's how memes are generated. In FF7R, Rude also tries not to attack Tifa, but obviously this isn't subtle anymore because now, obviously, everyone going into the game already knows about that. It's just copying a meme. It's not making their own joke, it's not funny. It's just tickling your fan service receptacles, and that's all. So in this game, Our first instance of this meme being shoved down our throats is while Tifa is climbing the tower and Rude is in the helicopter and he sees her and he pulls the gunship away so that it won't shoot her. But if we think about this logically by itself, not as a lazy copy and paste of an existing meme, it also doesn't make any sense anymore in the way that it's now being portrayed. This is probably the first time that Rude has ever seen Tifa in his life. As was the case in the original game, they have no reason to know each other already. Now, in a fight, like in a protracted melee-focused turn-based battle system like in the original, it would make more sense for Rude to get a good look at the people he's fighting against, and then come to a conclusion on how he feels about Tifa. However, I'm expected to believe that upon first glance, literally like a passing glance, look at this shit, look at this fucking scene.
Stairs.
Two birds with one shitload of bullets.
I'm expected to believe that he just, like, saw a hot girl he's never seen before for a split second and, like, seriously, in the blink of an eye, and instantly decides to get in the way of his own mission and his partner accomplishing their jobs. Now, in this particular case, it is technically possible that Rude has seen Tifa before from the footage of Barrett's crew attacking the second reactor that they blew up, which would have allowed him to recognize her at a glance. It's possible he's seen that footage. But this is still fucking weird if you bother to think about it. Like I said, at best, copy and pasting these memes and jokes for the lols is just lazy, uninspired, hack-writing drivel. And at worst, attempts to shove in these references to old memes actively end up fucking up the narrative or characterization in large or in small or large ways. But most importantly, they aren't funny. I've heard that joke before from the people you're copying off of, riding the coattails of. Write your own goddamn jokes. This is a sticking point that I will never share with many other ordinary people. See, I always view media as a product, first and foremost. A fictional story is exactly that, fiction. Something manufactured by a writer. Someone with something to say. A character obviously isn't a real person. They are lines on a page, an actor on a screen. They're the product of a fictitious creation. You imagine in your mind a person based on what you're told through the fiction. A character is not a fully formed entity, as I already said. People have a tendency to, say, want to see funny shit involving their favorite characters, but that's the problem. If someone else, is writing about an existing character, then it's not actually the same character. It's a new writer making a new character that's just copying the name of that character and maybe some of the traits and established history of that character. As such, I'm immune to stupid bullshit like this. This obviously isn't, oh, characters I like, but doing goofy new shit, ha ha ha. No, this is obviously just new characters being created by the dumb shit these new writers are vomiting onto the script. But again, it's not necessarily about the writer being the same. Like I said, characters are not set in stone. They don't actually exist. They are formed in the imagination by the content that is created by an artist or, someone pretending to be an artist. Now, sometimes artists just have good ideas. I mean, it's not just like consistent talent and hard work that creates good art. Sometimes it's just a matter of having good ideas that work well. In those cases, other people can, of course, copy those good ideas and make something of their own using those good ideas. If that good idea happens to be setting a setting or a character or something, then yes, good ideas, even when copied by inferior artists, can still be good ideas and be used to make something worthwhile, just probably not in the same way that the original used those good ideas. Good ideas that are copied by others to make worthwhile content usually aren't like characters, though, because of copyright and all that shit. But even so, those are still not the same thing. If I wrote a couple of pages of a story about Cloud Strife, if I made a story, it would be a new character. It would be my rendition of the fundamental ideas that people would recognize as being that character. Choosing which ideas I want to keep, which ones I want to discard, which ones I want to modify in some way, assuming that I'm even competent enough to understand all of the original ideas behind the character. Let's pretend that I'm a good fiction writer, which is even harder to believe than believing that this game is well written. But in any case, my Cloud might be used to make something worthwhile. But it isn't the same character. It's the character that is derived from my work. Nothing more, nothing less. So when I see shit like this, I don't think, oh my god, my favorite character, Cloud McFucking Strife, is doing goofy TikTok dances. This is so funny. Like a Chodsack would. Realistically speaking, this is exactly what I was thinking when I was watching this in my first playthrough. The character that they've been establishing with this game doesn't seem like the sort of person who would do this. He specifically said that he doesn't dance earlier in the game. How does Cloud know the choreography to this dance routine? Half of this story is people becoming obsessed with Cloud at a glance for seemingly no reason. This version of Jesse is obsessed with Cloud for no reason. Andreas is obsessed with Cloud for no reason. It's not because he's cute, because he only shows interest in Cloud after he beats all the Corneo Cup fights and beats the Hell House. He didn't show interest in Cloud before when he had already gotten a visual look at him, so apparently I guess he just likes good fighters, I suppose. That's the rationale I can use, but that presents even more problems because Cloud isn't a real first-class soldier, as I mentioned before about the power creep issues with the story. It's treating Cloud like he's some godlike fighter, but originally he wasn't. He was barely stronger than some dude with a gun arm and some girl next door character. He wasn't that strong. Plenty of other people canonically should be stronger than Cloud, and thus should be even more impressive to someone like Andreas, who apparently only likes Cloud because he beat the Corneo Cup. But whatever. We have to write every single fucking character to have a weird, bizarre fixation with Cloud because of fan service. Like, even Sephiroth is just another fucking Cloud simp at this point. The only character that it makes sense for them to simp this much this quickly for Cloud would probably be this version of Aeris, considering that she likely knows her memories from the future and already has an established idea of her relationship with Cloud even before having met him. Let's assume for a moment that this dance that he's currently doing, like, by musical logic, okay, where the character is just breaking away from the logic of their reality for a moment to express themselves through song and dance, even when it obviously isn't really happening, like any other musical, okay? That doesn't really work either, because Andreas shows an interest in Cloud precisely because he does this dancing shit. So it's not like something you can just hand-wave away as something that never really happened. It makes no sense for Cloud to do this, or even to be able to do this, but this had to happen for Andreas to help them along in the plot, as far as we're made aware. Cloud wears a dress in the original, but he resisted doing this. It was something that he didn't want to do, and it's not like he was performing on a stage in front of a bunch of people when he did it. This Cloud doesn't seem to put up any resistance to accepting this bizarre dance routine situation. Accepting all of that, let's assume that this is purely tongue-in-cheek and is just meant to make no sense and just be some silly little thing. Oh, it's Cloud dancing. Well, if it doesn't work within the confines of the narrative, like, say it's just funny to see Cloud wearing a dress because it's contrasting with his stoic and cool attitude that he's tried to maintain, which is inherently poking fun at Cloud's fixation with his outward image and trying to look cool at all times. That makes sense. And basically the same logic applies to the new scene of Cloud's hand massage, where the composure breaks and we can laugh at Cloud's genuine character flaws and personality traits. But when it's a dance routine that only happened in our imagination, like a musical number, because it doesn't make any sense for it to have happened the way it does, if we're looking at it seriously, then what do we have left? Some random pointless dance sequence that isn't really integrated into the actual plot? Where's even the joke here? Also, this is the laziest rhythm game I've ever seen, to the point that I completely forgot that this was technically a mini-game that I should have brought up in the gameplay video that I did earlier. I didn't even mention this mini-game in the gameplay focus video because it's so fucking forgettable. But anyways, that's pretty much me. All of that was basically my thoughts going through the stages of grief watching this scene on my first playthrough. A scene where literally the only thought that formed in someone's skull was, hey, wouldn't it be funny if Cloud did a dance? That's it. It's not working off of his character to create a joke or something charming to create to put him in a situation where his character flaws start to come out or anything. It's literally just ripping his soul out of his body for a few minutes so that the limbs of his lifeless dead husk of a fucking body can animate in this sequence and do something that the character wouldn't actually do like this. If this was a parody or making fun of dumb dance sequences, that'd be a different story, but it isn't. It isn't a parody. This is the scene. And this is why I will never see eye to eye with a lot of people, because a lot of people see this as the real Cloud doing a goofy dance, and that's why they like it, rather than seeing what it actually is, which is just some writers and directors making a scene with a formless entity that is a character, quote-unquote. Okay, so I've covered the basic concept of remakes, fan service, fan fiction, and the appeal of canon and hype, the desire fans have to see their fan fiction become canon or just get validated at all, tunnel vision of remakes and not looking at the bigger picture when judging something's quality, and the impossibility of modified content to be an improved version of something that already exists instead of just a new thing. So, let's talk about the other side of this game. Like I said, the game is two parts. It's not quite a remake, not quite a sequel. I talked about it being a remake, let's talk about it being a sequel. First things first, as I've said many a times, this story is unfinished. In fact, it's barely even started at all. There literally isn't a story for me to judge. So, you can't judge it positively or negatively. However, I can judge the act of not having a finished story as a negative. As of right now, I can only consider this game to be of the fan service genre, because what they have for their own original story isn't even close to being a comprehensive narrative. The story has no depth to it, it means nothing, it's just a lazy excuse for them to make some vague sci-fi magic-y bullshit, and they have all the time in the world to actually write the rules for how this shit works and write a real fucking story in the next installment of the series. Now, one thing I will give Nomura credit for is that he said in interviews that this game is not a replacement for the original. So, at least, even Nomura thinks you're fucking retarded if you're meant to argue that point. That it's supposed to be the original, but better. Nomura openly admits that it's a different story with different values, different appeals, and that nothing will ever replace the original. Weirdly enough, this is the only even remotely respectful thing I've heard anyone working on this game say about the original, despite how people like to say that it's a love letter to the original, even though they're all being super disrespectful and pretentious by saying all this kind of shit, like how it's going to fix all the original's problems, how the original had all these glaring issues that need to be improved. But, speaking of interviews, Kitase or someone else, one of those fuckers, said that this ending is not a sign that future installments will be very different from the original, and that it'll still be mostly following the original story. This is hilarious. This is probably the worst thing I have heard out of anything that has been said about this game. This one sentence took the tiniest amount of respect that I might have had for this game and chucked it out a window. This is pathetic. As we discuss the ending and its implications, we'll see why this statement is absolutely ridiculous and ultimately what it means for how they seem to view this series. So, the ending. People who care way more than I do have done some digging and found out some shit, so, and also the devs have literally spouted some exposition outside of the game. Actually, one second, quick rant. Fuck off, okay? Go fuck yourself. This is one of those trends that I have the absolute most hatred for as a writer. You don't get to write a story and then just change it after the fact in, fucking tweets and interview questions. The hack writer behind, say, 13 Sentinels did the same shit, where there's blatant fucking plot holes, and people asked him about those blatant fucking plot holes in his piece of shit story in interviews, and he just made up excuses on the spot that weren't actually in the writing of the game he made. He just literally made up new lore pulled out of his ass that was never in the fucking game, and the brainwashed fans just nod their heads and accept that, as if it was always meant to be. Now, even his shitty excuses after the fact have their own plot holes and problems, so that's hilarious. But as a concept, this is cheating. Your story should tell your story. You shouldn't just get to patch up things in your narrative once you realize that you fucked up after the fact and your game doesn't work as a standalone piece. If it wasn't told in your original story, I will not respect it enough to pretend like that's what your story was ever going for. If you had to say something, if you had something to say, you should have said it in your fucking story. It's not that hard to fucking understand. I'm so sick of writers writing shit that literally doesn't come out together as a solid narrative and then just making shit up in interviews or exposés after the fact just to add in more shit to try to fix the fact that their narrative wasn't complete from the start. Fuck off. I hate that so much. But anyways, the ending, as we understand, it seems to imply a multiverse of sorts. The whispers are the will of the planet, that is what is said, but at least some of the whispers are from the future, because they resemble characters from spin-offs. I don't know which spin-off, and I don't really care. Red describes the will of the planet as being something that was set in stone by the planet from the beginning of time. Now, I mean, if we're reading into this, that would imply that this one planet is, like, in charge of the entire universe, right? That's what I'm getting here. If fate, all of fate, is controlled by this one planet's will, which is, word for word, what they say. They say the whispers are the planet's will. Then there was probably no, like, Big Bang event, per se, that formed this planet over a long period of time, if this one planet is basically like the god of the universe. If that's the case, then, well, one, where the fuck did Genova come from? She is from a different planet, right? She's an alien, meaning some other planets must have life forms. And if the dumb meme about, say, FF10 and FF7 being in the shared universe is to be taken seriously, then clearly other planets with life must exist. If that is the case, does this planet's will, does it control fate across the whole universe, or just on this one planet? See, this actually matters a lot, because of the time travel multiverse type shit. Really quickly, there are a few small examples shown of how there are definitely parallel universes going on. Like, in the scenes with Zack, people have pointed out, one of the last shots, for example, that the dog Stamp is a completely different breed, a mascot, and possibly that Zack did not get gunned down by Shinra after escaping the Shinra Manor with Cloud. The Stamp thing is the one that tells us most blatantly and most about the parallel universe shit. It is a very minor change relative to the entire universe, at least, that had to just have been the result of, like, some guy in, I guess, the Shinra marketing department just happening to have picked a different breed of dog to portray their mascot as, right? Oh, really quickly, in watching some videos trying to get the perspectives, other perspectives that are out there, and see if I'm missing something about the ending, I was watching Mac's thoughts on the ending's implications, and this might be an old take from him that doesn't reflect his current opinion or whatnot, but at the time, Max was arguing that them going out of their way to show Stamp being different, that he was different in the ending, which is basically one of the only things, like, at all in the ending, since it's just a barren wasteland. There's nothing to look at, and the camera clearly shows this one thing. But Max argues that this is somehow not an important detail, and that it doesn't suggest any timeline fuckery. Here's my problem with that. Here's the problem with that, rather. One, obviously the detail means something. It wouldn't be there if it was pointless. Like, just a Midgar marketing agent decided to go with a different stamp design for, like, some off-brand fucking protein shake powder, whatever the fuck products they sell. So, that's a terrible argument. The other argument is that this stamp detail and any other potential world line scuffing changes is just a bait, but it's not actually significant or doesn't imply world line bullshit. Here's the problem with that. You know what's really great writing? Like, really just fucking intelligent, thought-out writing? Obviously, great writing is what happens when you imply something matters or that something interesting is going on, and then your big twist reveal is that your story is actually way more boring than you tricked people into thinking that it was going to be. Putting ideas in people's heads that are going to be far more interesting and appealing plot lines than the actual dog shit nothing story you're planning on writing, yeah, that sounds like a genius writing choice to me. If you do this, if you bait the audience to expect something interesting and the big reveal is that there's nothing interesting in your story, all you're accomplishing is fucking yourself over as a writer. It seems pretty fucking obvious to me. So let's say that Max is right and that this detail they went out of their way to provide means nothing. That would be even worse than what it already is. Also, at the end of the day, if you think that there aren't multiple timelines going on, then what in the ever-loving fuck could be your argument for why things are changing in weird, minor ways? Like, say, Cloud trying to kill Reno in one scene, or Cloud being told that he's not a soldier by the Hojo. Again, the time travel can't be used as an excuse, because how did the time travelers influence those very hyper-specific situations but almost nothing else in the world? There's no logical connection between, say, Sephiroth time traveling and Cloud just choosing to try to cut off Reno's fucking head. But I digress. Back to Stamp. This means that the multiverse is made up of very minor differences from the moment-to-moment choices of entities with free will, right? Like, they have to have free will for one timeline of people to pick this breed of dog and the other timeline to pick that breed of dog. So that immediately begs the question, is this idea of fate, which isn't really fate, it's just the will of this one planet, or the will of, is it localized to this timeline? This was my number one question about this, because, I mean, if a different timeline was allowed to have different choices get made in that timeline and different events happen in that timeline, then why didn't the Whispers stop those events from changing in that other timeline? Did that other timeline have its own set of Whispers with a totally different destiny set forward by the world or the planet or whatever? See, the problem is the concept of destiny and the concept of a multiverse where totally different shit happens in different universes, they are incompatible concepts, philosophically. Let's say each universe has its own destiny and Whispers and its own will of the planet. If that were the case, then why are things changing at all? I mean, Cloud randomly tries to kill Reno, the Whispers stop him. Barrett decided not to bring Cloud along for one of their missions. The Whispers interfered and broke Jesse's leg or ankle. Why are these things changing? If they're different because it's a multiverse where people can make slightly different decisions that create a divide and break off between multiple timelines, then, I mean, each timeline should have its own destiny suited to that timeline, right? Like, okay, Sephiroth killing Barrett, you could write that off as future Sephiroth in this timeline time-traveling back to this point, or maybe traveling from a different timeline to this timeline and trying to prove to these fucking idiots that the Whispers protect fate. But if that's the excuse for why that specifically changed, then why the fuck did the other deviations happen? How did Sephiroth time travel and change things in such a way that that stuff would play out almost exactly the same way, but just Cloud would randomly decide to try to kill Reno? And if he made a decision to do that, why? What was the point of that? You could argue that since Cloud still has the Genova cells in his body, that Sephiroth can take control of him. Even future time-traveling Sephiroth can still take control of him and influence him to attack Reno. But Cloud doesn't seem to act like him attacking Reno wasn't his own will. Cloud doesn't find it strange that he had tried to attack Reno, so that seems highly unlikely. It seems far more likely that Cloud tried to kill Reno because he just randomly decided of his own free will, a slight deviation consistent with the multiverse deviations like Stamp being a different breed of dog, just some human making a slightly different choice, causing a rift in timelines. If that is the case, and Cloud chose to try to kill Reno because it's just a timeline where he just decided to do that, that proves that there is only one fate across all timelines, not a different fate for each timeline. The problem with that is, well, why the fuck in the timeline we see with Zack, why the fuck is Stamp allowed to be a different breed of dog in the first place? That should also go against the will of the planet that has set forth the all of time and all of fate has written it from the beginning of time, right? So why is Zack, like, fine? That should also go against the will of the planet, no? Is this other timeline allowed to exist because in this alternate universe, those people in this universe also managed to kill the Whispers and deviate from the will of fate? I mean, I guess I could buy that. It doesn't seem very difficult, honestly. If fucking Midgar-level Cloud and co were able to beat and kill the Whispers, it doesn't seem like it's that hard to do. The other possibility to resolve this seemingly blatant plot hole is that perhaps it has to do with being able to perceive the Whispers. Now this would make a little bit more sense, but the evidence doesn't really point to this being the case. What am I talking about? Well, one of the biggest questions I had with the Whispers is, have they ever done anything before, right? Nobody seems to know about them other than the people that know about the planet, like Red and Eris. I mean, if the world is just playing out according to a script that has been written by the planet from the beginning of time, then why is it on the script in the first place? Like, if people have free will and can make different choices and have a multiverse and shit, that means that this universe is not under deterministic philosophy. Determinism is the idea that you do not have free will, that every action that happens is a direct result of physics, and nothing else could have happened instead. Your brain is just a collection of physics, chemical events occurring, your thoughts are the result of calculatable biological functions. Perhaps everything that you do and think is the direct result of this, and there is no possible deviation. That is the idea of determinism. However, if there is a multiverse, there can't be determinism in this universe. If there is no determinism, then how did the planet get everything up to this point and go according to their script of destiny? You see what I mean? Like, history has existed for thousands of years before the start of FF7R, at least. So how did all of those thousands of years go according to their script? Did it just deterministically play out according to their script? Like, nothing went wrong, they put the pieces in the right place and everything just went out without a hitch? Or were things constantly going a little bit off script, but the Whispers were also constantly interfering and fixing things as they went along? If that is the case, then why has no one ever noticed the Whispers throughout all of history? Well, now we can talk about the other weird part of this game. Right at the start of FF7R, Cloud sees Eris getting harassed by something invisible, something he can't see. Now, Cloud sees this, he doesn't see the Whispers, but he can see Eris acting bizarre. When Eris touches Cloud's arm, Cloud is then able to see the Whispers from that point on. Now, it's unclear if the Whispers are just, like, intangible, or if you actually can't perceive anything they do. For instance, if say, like, your lighter went out, like, the rain put the fire out of your lighter, but that went against the script of destiny, and the Whispers came and relit your lighter, would you, if you're a bumfuck normal-ass human, would you, notice that they relit the lighter and be confused? Or would your brain, like, morph in such a way that you think it was always lit and never went out, like how Perfect Plan works in Hunter x Hunter? See, it seems to me like even the Whispers have some really strong powers. Like, they bring Barrett back from the dead, which I guess the planet should have the power over life and death since it has the life stream and all that shit. But the Whispers don't seem to be able to, say, go back in time a few seconds and stop Barrett from having been stabbed in the first place. Or, like, revive him and then wipe everyone's memories. They didn't wipe everyone's memories of that event, of the fact that they just saw him get stabbed and come back from the dead. Now, when the Time Ghosts first show up, Eris was dealing with them in the street. Cloud approaches, gets a vision of Sephiroth. Eris says, thank you for scaring those things away, which makes no sense if Cloud is just another normal human with no connection to the planet. Like, why the fuck would Cloud scare the Whispers away? There's still no explanation for why they were harassing Eris in that scene at all. It's possible that time-traveling Sephiroth, like, used his influence over Genova cells in Cloud's body to trigger this particular hallucination in such a way so that it fucked with the time ghosts, which time-traveling Sephiroth could reasonably be considered to have power over the time ghosts. It makes slightly more sense to assume that this is the case, that all of these hallucinations of Sephiroth are in fact the work of time-traveling Sephiroth using the Genova cells, triggering to alter Cloud's actions and thoughts. And, like, maybe Cloud was, like, extra angry since he was constantly being reminded of Sephi more so than he was in the original, and that's why he randomly chose to try to kill Reno, and likewise also why he was going to kill Johnny to silence him, and Tifa was like, what the fuck are you doing, Cloud? This also pretty much has to be the case because Cloud also has a brief hallucination really early on of the plate segment falling, which is literally a glimpse of the future. So either he has future sight powers now too for some reason, or it's Sephi controlling him and his visions with the Genova cells to make him see these things. This could explain some of Cloud's actions. It doesn't explain why Sephi would want these things, why Sephi would put these visions in Cloud's head, like what the benefit is. But there's still a shitload of holes, and still no one else's actions being different from the original timeline make any sense other than Cloud. Like Barrett just deciding, hey, I guess we won't actually hire Cloud for this next mission. That makes no sense. But then again, in that scene, Aeris also asks, what are they, in a way that doesn't seem like she's trying to play dumb, especially since it doesn't make any attempts to play dumb anywhere else in the story where she's obviously implying that she knows something about what's going on. You know, all those other fucking scenes. So, who knows? The writers certainly don't, I can tell you that much. Anyways, so Cloud can now perceive the whispers, and he touches Tifa and Barrett and all the other Avalanche fucking morons, so now they can all see the whispers too. We know that other people in town can't see the whispers, but they do see Avalanche acting strange, even though in the original timeline, those regular humans didn't see Avalanche acting strange in this situation. But the whispers don't seem to, like, wipe their memories of this, all those other humans that watch Avalanche fight these invisible ghosts. It is possible that the whispers normally have a lot of power because no one can perceive the things that they're changing, but they are just way less powerful once someone has been given the gift of being able to see them. However, Hojo, I don't think he was given the gift of being able to perceive them, but when he was carried off, he still perceived it. He said, what is this fascinating phenomenon, as he was being carried off, which means even a bumfuck nobody with no ability to see the whispers at all could still tell that some weird magic shit was happening, that some force was changing things. If that's the case, then why has no one, in all of history, ever noticed this? If Aeris can see it because she's a Cetra, then that logically means that thousands of years ago, all the Cetra were immune to the effects of the whispers because they could all just tell if the whispers were trying to change things. They could all just see them, right? That makes no sense. If the planet made the whispers as a defense mechanism to silently and unnoticeably fuck with the things that went against the script of fate that they set in place, then why would it create a power that all the native people of the planet at the time could just see and be aware of? If the Cetra wanted to, they could have just gone against the off-script of the planet's will at any time they wanted and fought against the Whispers. The only possible explanation for this is the Cetra were good people who only wanted what was best for the planet and wouldn't ever want to go against the planet's wishes. But I guess Aeris is different. Like, she's the only Cetra in history that decided to go against this will of the planet and will of the fucking fate for some reason. I mean, there's another blatant contradiction where Aeris can know all the shit because she's a Cetra or whatever, but she didn't know all the shit in the original game, and Aeris can't be here time-traveling from the future because she's weak. She's at her base level from the original game. That's not an airtight excuse, but I find it unlikely that this Aeris is fundamentally different from the original game's Aeris. If she is time-traveling, what is her goal, even? Because she changes her mind in this game. She clearly plays the part and goes along with the script of destiny most of the game, but then later on she decides to commit to fighting against the planet's will. Why? Not really clear. She says some shit about how Sephiroth is the most evil villain of all time, more fucking middle schooler fanfiction shit to jerk off to how fucking cool Sephiroth is, and how the planet just doesn't know what's best to stop Sephiroth. Maybe that is because the whispers and the will of the planet are localized to this particular timeline, and Eris, for some reason, knows that this Sephiroth is from a different timeline or from the future or something like that, and because of that, the planet isn't properly equipped to accurately identify him as the threat that he is, or some shit like that. I don't know, man. I'm scrambling here to try to write a coherent plot out of this where none clearly exists. We also have to ask, why is it like this at all? Red says that fate is just the roadmap for reality set in stone from the beginning by the planet's will, meaning that everything that happened in the future as well is something that the planet wanted to happen from the start, right? We have to ask, why? Why? What the fuck is the point of any of this? Why would the planet choose this as the path of destiny that it wrote from the beginning? Why? Did the planet really just want to see Cloud in a dress? Assuming that all of this shit was chosen by the planet as the path of destiny because it wanted the end result of the original game of Holy being cast, was every little other thing that happened along the way really necessary? Here's where we run into another plot hole. The Whispers are said to be the will of the planet, and what they wrote thousands of years ago as the script of destiny was also the will of the planet. Problem: we're told in the lore that the weapons were also created by the planet to fight against threats and protect it, and the weapons do just that in the original. They try to fight like Sephiroth and Shinra, but it doesn't work. They aren't smart enough. Like, the weapons are, no argument, they are the will of the planet. The planet controls them actively. So it doesn't make sense for them to not have the same knowledge and the same plan and the same power as the Whispers, who are also the will. The same fucking will. If the will of the world is for destiny to unfold in such a way that Sephiroth does all this shit and casts Meteor and all this other crap, then why the fuck did the weapons, also the will of the planet, try to stop him? It's very clear in the original that the weapons, and even if we ignore the blatant, the dialogue that they say in the game that confirms that the Whispers are at the will of the world, even if we were to say, okay, well, whatever, let's pretend like it has no connection to the planet at all. They're just all of fate, like fate is some abstract concept of the universe or something. Even then, what would be the universe's goal in writing the script of fate this way? What the fuck is the point? Why? Why it went out of its way to write all of this? It's not like it was deterministic and it's just trying to maintain its determinism by going towards an uncertain future. No, all of this, it says, was written from the beginning. Why? What's the fucking goal? Why? Who did this? Why? What? But anyways, yeah, it's clear that the weapons are not omnipotent. They could have killed Sephiroth a long time ago. Hell, they could have stopped Sephiroth from being born at all. They could have stopped Shinra and the scientists a long time ago. If the planet was actually omnipotent, was actually really smart and could see the future and all these things, it could have solved all these problems that threaten the planet anytime it wanted to before they became too powerful for the weapons to defeat. If it just wanted Holy to be cast, it could have done that any number of ways. It didn't need to go down in this exact manner. In the original, it is obvious that the planet just wants what is best for itself. It creates the weapons to protect itself from future threats, etc. What is the goddamn excuse for the planet writing this path of destiny and going out of its way to defend this particular path of events? I don't know the plot of Advent Children, but assuming bad things happened that threaten the planet in that plot too, was that also the planet writing the script of destiny and being like, I really feel like being threatened again. Let's write that in. And why are the Whispers so easy to beat? They are omnipotent. They wrote all of history that has happened up to this point, apparently. They fucking time travel, apparently. Because, people have pointed out that some of the Whispers you fight in the very last boss fight of the game, resemble or have features that are future characters from spin-off shit. So why the fuck can Cloud Tifa, Barrett, Eris, and Red just beat them physically. Why? Like, by shooting them and stabbing them some. Really? These fucking idiots that are not really powerful? Like, we talked about the issues with power creep. I mentioned a couple times so far in this video, but like, you know, in the original game when you leave Midgar and you go to the giant fucking serpent, you know, the classic shit, everyone knows what I'm talking about, and you can't beat it, and then later on in the game you go back and it's like impaled in a spike, and that's like your sort of visualization of, goddamn, you know, Sephiroth really is like that fucking strong, and we're a bunch of punk bitches. We're weak as fuck relative to the other things in this universe. So why were those punk bitch weak ass losers able to beat these Whispers? Why? Why are the Whispers so easy to beat? It is so fucking painfully obvious that all of these things that I've talked about are massive contradictions and plot holes. This makes no sense at all. And why does it make no sense? Let's go back to that statement from Kitase, or whoever it was, about how the rest of the remakes will more or less still follow the original game's surface-level plot events. You know what this means? All this shit with time travel and multiverses and fate and the will of the planet and all that, despite how overwhelmingly these massive world-bending factors should shift the focus of the narrative, these fucking punks are saying that the story is actually just going to be more or less the same as the original. That is a joke. That is hilarious. That is so stupid. There are a few things that this proves outright. One, they have no idea what the original story was like. There is no way that this storyline with this time travel bullshit would ever have the same feel or strike the same tone or be about the same things as the original narrative. It can't be about the same themes. It can't have the same artistic vision. It can only copy the absolute most surface level plot points. 2, this series only exists for fan fiction. I had thought that this story was going in a direction where they might have their own narrative to tell by drastically changing things, but they clearly don't. They're still just making uninspired fan fiction of the original game, where all the content will just be about fan service for the larger community surrounding the game. This entire plot about the time travel and the other worlds and fate is just a half-assed hack writer excuse for them to derail the original plot line sometimes so that they can make half-assed minor adjustments to the surface level plot for the sake of more fan service and fan fiction. You know, and say like BoJack Season 3, where BoJack wants to do Ethan around, but Ethan says that the horse died at the end of the series, and BoJack responds, oh, we can just write around that, you know? Like, the horse dying was a dream. The horse had a twin brother. The horse came back as a ghost. Ethan missed the horse so much he built a robot horse. This is exactly that same joke, but missing the punchline. This plot could have been added to literally any fiction. This thing about the time travel and the Whispers and everything. Didn't like how the new Star Wars movie went? Well, we can just make a new movie where it's revealed suddenly that time travel and multiverse exists and the characters fight this new random fucking force of destiny, and it changes the events to rewrite the story however they want. See? This shit has nothing to do with FF7. It's a hack writing trick they can shove into any story anywhere. It's a lazy excuse for them to do whatever they fucking feel like. The rest of the story isn't going to be about time travel or fate. It's just this one shit-stained section to be used this way, and in the exact same way as the, you know, like, it was all a dream excuse to let them write their uncreative, unimpressive, tired-ass fan fictions. That's all this is. They don't have the balls to actually tell a new story around this crazy bullshit. It's just an excuse to make small changes to the original plot while still leaving most of the work of the writing up to the original, so they don't have to actually do any work. And 3, this proves that this story has nothing to say. It has no purpose, no direction, it has no artistic vision. It only exists to write middle school fan fictions, and that is the saddest thing of all. What I find funny about that is the fact that this wasn't necessary. They're already contradicting the original in many ways. For example, you go with Jesse on the side mission up to the plate, and you fight the fucking awful Nomura character on the bike named Roche that I forgot to mention earlier. And the whispers don't stop you from doing that. It's different from the original, as far as we perceived. They changed things from the original, but apparently that doesn't count as going against the script of Destiny. So, what's to stop anything else? They could have just written whatever the fuck they wanted without making this time travel excuse. People already fucking expected them to write different shit. Imagine writing time travel into a story that has nothing to do with time travel, and then saying, oh, this is just a little road bump, we'll go back to the old plot and just follow that again once this bit wraps up. That is fucking amazing. That's somehow even worse than just writing a bad time travel story like Nomura usually does, where he just pulls shit out of his ass as he goes, makes up new rules on the fly, retcons all over the place, doesn't bother to think through his world to make sure everything is narratively solid, lines up correctly, doesn't have a bunch of plot holes, and then just shits it out and hopes his brainwashed fans will fill in the gaps and blatant contradictions for him. This really makes me question, like, think about it. Like, they have the easiest job in the world, right? All they have to do is just copy the original, make it flashy, appeal to fan service, and popular headcanon, and, that's it. That's all they have to do. They'll be praised as geniuses and rake in boatloads of money. That's it. Yet, they might be so incompetent that it's possible they could even fuck that up. The easiest fucking job. For instance, even amongst fanboys wearing their, rose-colored glasses and all, not a lot of people have much fondness or respect for, say, the retcons and additions of Crisis Core. There is not a big audience screaming for fucking Crisis Core fan service, and yet they're still shoving it in the retcons and the extended bullshit of all these much less beloved spin-offs. Why? Even the people who will burst into tears and call this fucking thing Game of the Year because they copy and pasted the plot line of Cloud in a dress from the original and made it into this flashy, stupid fan service thing, even those chumps and sheeple aren't going to be like, oh yeah, give me those savory Crisis Core tie-ins. Is it possible that they're so delusional they think that they can use all of their other bad ideas that no one likes as fan service conduits and still get the same results? Surely they have to know that those aren't really doing any favors for them in terms of emotional manipulation and appeals to fanfiction, right? It'll be interesting to see if they somehow manage to fuck this up, despite them not having to do a goddamn thing to succeed when making products for these rose-colored glasses fellas. Stop yourself for a moment and think. Do you know how many awful, and I mean really fucking awful, FF7 spin-off shit these exact same creators have made? The heads like Nomura and Kitase, I mean. They haven't made something good for FF7 since their contributions to the original FF7 under the supervision of the clearly more talented game designer and writer in Sakaguchi. And the way, I mean... just fucking, look at this clip.
With certain shit. We don't have an exact, a story identity anymore. Fuck, dude, this is crazy. This is crazy, man. I don't like that. I fucking love that. I love that it's not going to be the exact same thing anymore. That we don't know whether or not things are going to happen. I love that. That we're going to be just left questioning and there's going to be all these crackpot theories of...
Isn't this hilarious? After months and months of guzzling this game's salty cum down his throat, gulp after gulp after gulp, praising it for being a faithful retelling of the original, praising it for being the original game's content and modern graphics, all this other shit. After all this time of using that as his primary selling point for this game, at the drop of a hat, it's just, oh, I actually really don't care about them remaking the original. I was just joking around with all that. All of a sudden now, I'm really into the idea of brand new shit. You know what has new shit, and you don't know what's going to happen next? Literally anything new. Literally any new game. Most video games have this quality. If they had marketed this as just some totally new spin-off from the start, you probably wouldn't have done all these leaps in logic to somehow try to make it sound like creating new content in a new story, some galaxy brain feat that only the most enlightened of game creators could have possibly come up with. If you want new shit that'll be exciting because you don't know what'll happen or what the quality of it will be, you could have gotten that from them just making a new fucking game, actually having the balls to put their own goddamn ideas to the test. It's amazing to me how people will abandon all of their previous logic and arguments in order to maintain their current pair of rose-colored glasses. But again, this also goes back to what I said at the very beginning. The fact that they now internally associate this series of new games with the original FF7 and their fandom over it, they think that any new content will automatically be of the quality of the original game's content. They have absolutely no backbone. No concept of what they even want. They think they know what they want, as most normies do, but like most normies, they're wrong almost all the time about what they really want. This has been proven countless times throughout history. If people actually knew what they wanted from entertainment or art, they'd have the knowledge to create it themselves. A good writer knows how to write something that people will like far better than a dumbass consumer will. Am I saying that these people wanted new content this whole time? No. I already explained what the true appeal for hooking these kinds of consumers is. It has nothing to do with being a faithful remake or being ambitious and new with a new exciting story. Are there people working on this game that know what they're doing? Yes. They clearly got some writers and designers to tell them what to do, with making at least some of the core cast seem accurate, unlike how they act in the other spin-off shit. Some of the dialogue is really, really awful, but some of it, usually banter scenes in between the main cast, is actually shockingly decent and somewhat charming. That wouldn't happen unless some people that wrote some of the dialogue were actually good at their jobs. However, the people in charge of the largest decisions are the exact same people that have been making dog shit for years. Nojima too, and Toriyama, who was only just a grunt worker on the original FF7, has since gone to direct fantastic games like the fucking FF13 saga, although to be 100% fair to Toriyama, he did direct FF10 too, which wasn't too bad. Toriyama is also co-directing FF7R, so remember that. Also, you don't need to remember anything, because you can just look with your fucking eyeballs and think with your fucking brain at the writing in this game and plainly see that it sucks. It's easier to point out the few things that don't suck than it is to pick and choose every single thing that does suck in the writing, and everything else is just piggybacking off of the original game, copy and paste, which obviously involves no actual writing either, just doing whatever takes the least amount of thought to shove into the script. The only things fans could even point to in this story to pretend like any of it involves good writing is shit that would be considered a basic storytelling by a 10-year-old probably, or much, much worse than that.
I'm a cyborg created to serve as Hojo's assistant. I was given knowledge and power beyond that of a human, but I was robbed of free will, bound to obey the whims of my master. But when we met, Cloud, I sensed something within you. Something I knew would allow me to break free of my chains.
Now, I'm poking fun at Max a lot as sort of what I instinctively consider to be kind of the poster child for FF7R simping. But remember, this is all just dumb, bad video game takes. It's not a big deal. Having shit taste is not a big problem. I still think Max is a cool guy, just one that happens to have shit taste that's easy to make fun of. And even he has some standards.
No, it's not that he doesn't know. No, Chad. It's not the way the character looks. It's not the way, it's not the visuals of the character. It's what the character represents. What the character represents in the horrible compilation of Final Fantasy VII retellings of some of these stories, where what this represents and how he is used in the story is the worst shit possible. The worst shit. It is so horribly stupid.
Now, I mentioned that Nomura is not going to be directing the next game, or this Yuffie DLC thing, and instead the reins will be fully passed over to this other guy, Hamaguchi, who doesn't have as many credits to his name. In that sense, I weirdly have more faith in his abilities, because, unlike the others, it hasn't been proven that he makes dog shit. And looking at the FF7R plot, you can tend to see where the Nomura influences come, where the Nomura awful, worthless, plot hole infested nonsense writing comes into play. especially with this laughable fanfiction time travel shit stuff. So, maybe, theoretically, Nomura made all the dog shit, and this other guy, Hamaguchi, made all the stuff that actually works and doesn't insult your intelligence to watch. We can dream, I suppose. The only thing I know about Hamaguchi is that he likes FF6, so that gives me a positive impression of his taste. I mean, we can also probably look to Nomura for a lot of the combat direction too, and while it is very flawed all around, as I spoke in my previous video, it's got a nugget of something fun underneath all the overwhelming problems with it. Nomura doesn't strike me as the kind of guy who ever learned anything about writing or game design. I think he just does shit and then he tries to fix it until it works as time goes on. In any case, quoting Nate once again, I wish Nomura an improved game and the success that should derive from it. But yeah, that's what it is. You know, the title of this video is how to improve this story, but I don't think it's possible. They've already done some major fuck-ups with even being a fan-servicey remake, with all this is time travel shit that they cannot go back from smoothly. If they're just to ignore it going forward, that's nothing but an insult to the viewer's intelligence. I'm sure most of the people that suck their dicks for free won't mind, and that's the beautiful irony of rose-colored glasses. People want to see something as amazing, and so they do. Classic confirmation bias. They can scream, oh, this remake is so good, it's everything I remembered, it's so faithful, and then 2 seconds later, upon being forced to realize that that's just a lie, they start screaming, oh, I actually don't care about being a faithful remake, getting a totally new story, the time travel bullshit is so cool, guys. They don't actually want anything other than the ability to praise whatever they're looking at. They want to tell themselves that they're having fun, that it's all divine, and so they shall. So long as they're looking at something that they can tell themselves, looks like Cloud, she looks like Tifa, must be FF7, must be amazing, then, you know, that'll be good enough for them. And frankly, who am I to say otherwise? As a huge proponent of fuck all remakes, I feel that I should balance the scales a little bit. At the end of the day, what is the downside to these remakes being made? A company gets rewarded with money and praise that they don't deserve from this mediocre shit that they create. I could complain about that, but the world is filled with instances of people or companies getting money and praise that they don't deserve and didn't earn, so that's nothing new. People believe that this is somehow good writing or good game design. Well, of course it bugs me how everyone has shit taste and no understanding of what constitutes good anything. But again, nothing new. Look how much money fucking like Marvel movies rake in with next to no ambition or artistic merit. And frankly, from the creatives I'm aware of, most real artists actually tend to prefer having mid-sized budgets rather than AAA budgets, since all the money requires a kind of guarantee on investment, which generally means fuck creativity. We just have to go for the reliable exploits, like anything with generic mass appeal, and stuff like remakes that just prey upon people's psychological vulnerabilities are perfect for that. Mid-sized budgets generally allow for the artist to remain somewhat more in control over their projects. Sure, you get the rare exceptions where publishers actually do trust developers with massive budgets and let those devs try out their wild, creative ideas, but those are rare cases. And a lot of the times, even the artists that are allowed to use all of their ideas, they just aren't talented, or their ideas don't happen to be good. They don't come together, so their ideas mostly suck, and their execution of their ideas sucks even harder. Look at, like, the David Cages of the world, for example. Yes, David Cage eventually made an entertaining game, but after lots of dog shit. So in the end, is it that big of a problem that all this money gets wasted on this mediocre dog shit that appeases the lowest common denominator of consumer? No, not really. People that want to actually make something good will continue to do so it's not really a big deal. Really, the only lingering concern regarding when mediocre shit gets all this reward for being mediocre is just a matter of respect. This game doesn't deserve people's respect. It's exploiting you. Why not just tell it like it is? Even if you engage with the fan service, fanfiction, hype cycle appeal of the game, why not just understand that it's a matter of your weakness to fan service, not actually like something that took real intelligence or talent to create? But beyond this game not deserving respect, there is of course the element of disrespect towards real artists that happens naturally by putting this schlock on a pedestal above the works of people who actually tried to make something decent. Easiest example is the original FF7 itself, which many people passive-aggressively insult in their attempt to ramp up their own sense of dick-sucking fandom for this remake. Respect is the only true problem with this practice. Sure, bad or otherwise, mediocre games get praised all the time just by people who don't know any better. But with remakes, the tables are skewed a little bit. With remakes, people come in already looking to praise them. Remakes can, like, essentially be games that most people wouldn't really think twice about and just see as something acceptable or mediocre as a product, but the fact that it's a remake from the start means that they have to praise it. But at the end of the day, that's it. Just respect. And people have shit taste anyway, so all their awful opinions are inherently disrespecting more deserving artists in the world all the time. So again, nothing new. Since big publishers are going to make remakes because they're basically free money, and the big budgets will almost always only go to the safest, suckiest shit, we all just have to accept that this is reality. This is how it is. People will always have shit taste, and will always be easily exploited by this kind of manipulation. That's why, as much as everyone agrees that, like, say, loot boxes are bad, they still make a shitload of money. Well, because they work. It's human nature. So I can't implore all of humanity to rise above human nature. I mean, if someone has never learned anything about good writing or good game design, why would they know it? So instead, I would implore the people with the means to create these things, if you're given the resources to make massive games like this, and you know for a fact that it will be praised because you slap FF7R in the title, can you at least care a little more and try a little harder to make something worthy of respect? If you don't have the talent or knowledge to make that happen, then you can practice and learn. You're lucky enough to be paid to do fucking nothing, have no ideas, no expertise, nothing. You could at least try to improve your own expertise a little bit more. So really, to answer the original question of how to make it better going forwards, they obviously aren't willing to commit to telling their own story with their own ideas, as they've clarified. But at least they can make a game filled with dumb fan service at least a little bit better than this. Write actually compelling side content, write actually interesting new tangents for characters or new characters or all the shit that I talked about that they didn't need to do. Yeah, just like do that, but do it actually well instead of mediocre. Think about your game's strengths. Don't waste time on weak bullshit. Write less cringy dialogue and less ham-fisted plot lines. Critically analyze your writing for mistakes and plot holes. For example, not including the dumb time travel fate shit. They added a line that says, like, great example. They added a line that says, Eris has to come with Shinra willingly, quote unquote. That's what they say. That's what's their excuse for why they have never grabbed her up till now that we're watching in the plot. Now, yes, it is weird in the original FF7 that Shinra wouldn't just snap up Eris at any point in time before the plot actually occurs, considering how important they think she is to their grand plans. But this throwaway line about how Eris needed to come with Shinra willingly is even weirder and more stupid. This makes no sense. She made a deal with them here to save Marlene and maybe some other people in Sector 7 in exchange for going with them. That's not willingly, it's extortion. If that qualifies as going willingly, then they could have just kidnapped anyone at any time. They could have kidnapped Elmira at any time up to now and then threatened to kill her unless Eris goes with them. That's essentially what they did now. Also, no reason is given for why it needs to be willingly, quote-unquote. And we know that Shinra just wants to get information out of her, information that they think she has, but she actually doesn't. So what is this willingly bullshit? Why? They're not even correct in this assumption, so why would they know something about needing her to come willingly for something to work? They're wrong about it even working at all. It makes no fucking sense. No one spent 2 goddamn seconds proofreading this shit to ensure their half-assed, worthless additions to the script like this even make any sense. If you're going to add something new, actually write it well. I know it's somehow a difficult concept to understand, but if you don't know how to do that, as it seems like you don't, then learn from the people who do. Actually compare the ideas you are coming up with in the present to the ideas the original creators had to come up with in order to make it in the first place, and see the stark difference in how creative they are. Why have I put more thought into this narrative than the people who wrote it? Try harder, do better. No matter what. 90% of the game will still just be copying the hard work of the original, the ideas of the original. So it still will never be as praiseworthy as the original, especially when it's so unambitious in the first place. But then again, that's what you signed up for when you said the word remake. And remember, as I always say, any of these individual criticisms on their own are not a death sentence for anything. Plot holes and contrivances, not necessarily a big issue. They're easy to ignore a lot of the time. Lackluster character writing, fine. Cringy dialogue, pretty common, all things considered. Everything ever made has flaws, weaknesses. It's not the weaknesses that usually make something a bad piece of media in reality. No, what makes a bad piece of media is a lack of strengths. I've shit on a lot of the fan service in this video, but I don't mean to imply that fan service is inherently bad per se. Most of the time, I don't give a shit. I'm take it or leave it. For the people who are easily manipulated into feeling this type of hype and fan service and obsession with their own lust for something, telling themselves how much they love something and how much they relate to the surrounding community that loves something, this has strengths. It's not well written or praiseworthy, but to the consumer, it has strengths if they're the type that can enter into this simp mentality. To someone like me, who likes quality instead of fan service, this is a huge train wreck of a game that is filled with weaknesses and barely has any strengths. There are so many other criticisms I could levy against this game, but now we should go back to the original concept. Why? Why do people like this in the first place? I've explained why fandom and fan service and fan fiction, all that other shit is appealing, and rose-colored glasses and consuming media for the sake of being part of a club, the fans over it, all that kind of shit. But there's actually another reason. I was reminded of this reason recently while going back over some of my favorite video essay content on the site, and I'd like to share this particular video with you all. I understand that most people don't want to listen to like a fucking 15-minute long piece of reference material, so I've saved this part for the very end. In any case, go ahead and watch a re-upload of this video. I'll go ahead and leave a link right here, about here, and it's also in the description. Great series of video essays. I recommend watching the whole thing from start to finish. It's about like 3-4 hours long, I think. But this particular section of the video essays resonates with my thoughts on why this sort of fan service focused spin-off type content garners so much popularity despite no talented original writing or anything of the sort being put into it, you know. Obviously, anything that is easy to consume by a wide audience has a greater chance of becoming popular than, say, something of higher quality but a narrower niche audience. That's why I say, like, Friends. Friends is one of the most popular and successful TV shows of all time, despite me having never met a single person who claims it to be their personal favorite TV show. And no, I'm not saying Friends is necessarily mediocre, but beyond just having broad appeals, while avoiding things that might push certain people away, like something being overly violent or edgy, or because something is overly saccharine, something being cartoonish, for example, something like Asterisk War is also just constructed in a way that is comfortable. It's more than the art style being familiar, as he talks about. It's the type of series, it's the plot, it's what you get out of watching it. It's the tropes, it's the expectations. The show is comfortable because it isn't challenging the audience. It's predictable. It's generic, it's cliched, and all of those things work towards its popularity rather than against it, because it just plain isn't difficult to watch. It's like Skinner-box psychology a little bit. The show is so predictable in every single way that you essentially know what predetermined appeals you're going to get out of it. You've seen a million fucking characters identical to these ones, so you don't need to stress your brain to pay attention or anything like that. You just identify the archetypes and consume the natural appeals that they bring. The McDonald's comparison is perfect. I couldn't have put it any better. It's comfortable, familiar, addicting. It is junk food. The main difference between Ass War and FF7R is that people actually do lie to themselves and convince themselves that FF7R is a masterwork of art, when in reality it's exactly the same as those stupid fucking dancing Persona games and this junk food type shit. In my opinion, there are two levels through which media can be appealing to the viewer, through quality and through comfort. Recently, I've been catching up on my backlog of shit that I've never got around to watching, old and recent. Things I expected are good, things I expect are bad, and I can easily explain the difference with my experience, say, watching... Okay, let's take these two. Watching both Paranoia Agent and the first season of 13 Reasons Why at roughly the same time. Paranoia Agent is fantastic, 13 Reasons Why is a trash fire of a piece of media that's somehow even worse when observing the moral implications of the show and how it was written with and directed with no sense of maturity or handling delicate subject matter responsibly. However, it was actually easier for me to sit through and consume 13 Reasons Why Season 1 because it's just a collection of tropes. It was predictable, and in its predictable nature, it feels comfortable to watch. It's just like sort of when you're farming for XP in a game by doing the same route over and over. You don't really get bored of doing it, but playing through something new or making a decision in the game for what to do next sometimes makes you feel bored, because when your brain isn't really focusing, you're more resistant to the feeling of boredom, since you're not consciously aware of your surroundings and your sense of boredom while zoning out. 13 Reasons Why was easier to watch because I don't need to think while watching it. It helps you if you don't think, actually. The tropes are familiar, the events that play out are familiar, the manner in which the story expresses itself is familiar. It's very easy to digest. Paranoia Agent was not as easy to digest. It's often not clear where it's going, it doesn't follow a singular plot line or protagonist, so you don't get used to a status quo of the plot or characters. It does not have any of the appeals of junk food. It is not easy to digest. Having junk food appeals isn't necessarily a bad thing per se. My favorite pieces of media are usually things that are both high quality and enjoyable and easy to consume, like junk food. And of course, not everything that one person consumes as junk food will work on something else. Like, I get the concept of guilty pleasure viewings, that makes sense, but sometimes things are so tropey and generic that they're boring to me, even turning my brain off. Plenty of media markets operate purely off of understanding junk food type appeals. This is exactly why reality TV is so big. Also, I recognize that even shit that seems trashy on the surface can actually still have some value. Take, like, an immature, edgy light novel series aimed at young adult boys with just a generic power and sex fantasy, such as *War. At the end of the day, it's still appealing to the base instincts of, like, a young kid, to their taste for junk food. It keeps them entertained. There's an old opinion piece I remember reading many years ago about violence in media and its effect on children, and how suppression only ensures that children do not properly explore their own natural feelings and instincts and learn to understand and be comfortable with them. It was written by a psychology professor who was recounting his own experiences as a youth, who started reading the Hulk comics and other juvenile but yet violent media. Through fantasizing about comic book violence, he began to understand his own emotions that he's been suppressing and living in relative fear of. People naturally experience the world, and by relating their experience through fiction, it usually helps them to process what they feel, be it through the catharsis of violence and expressions of anger, or the lust of sexual desires. Even what we would consider trashy young adult dog shit has a value, and that it often helps kids process what they're going to be feeling anyways. I'm not going to throw in entire other video here, but one of the last videos in Digi's series on *War was going in depth talking about another extremely similar anime that was airing at roughly the same time, with the same junk food appeals in every sense, but it was at least slightly higher quality, was slightly better. Digi makes a very powerful pledge about the value of being able to look critically and recognize the difference between a 1 out of 10 show and a 2 out of 10 show, instead of slapping everything that appears bad or trashy as being equally worthless, and I completely agree with that sentiment. So, we come back to FF7R, and I have to ask myself, is this a 1 out of 10 or a 2 out of 10? This is pure junk food, but does it still have value as junk food, or does it only detract from people's already laughable understanding of what quality writing even is? All junk food, no quality. But should people who just want junk food settle for this shit? Or is there a slightly better 2 out of 10 out there that they could get their fucking McDonald's fix from while at least consuming something a little bit less shitty? Or is my bias getting in the way of me viewing this as a 2 out of 10? when realistically, something like Crisis Core or Advent Children could very well be the 1 out of 10 that people should be avoiding in order to consume something slightly better like this. I don't know. All I can implore of people is to be mindful of their own standards of quality and to at least try to seek out what is better, rather than what is convenient and comfortable. And even if you do just settle for this pure junk food, that's fine and all. More power to you. But you could at least try not to fucking lie to my face and pretend like this dog shit is something incredible, when it obviously isn't, with even the slightest bit of critical examination. Well, that's all I've got, folks. I've hoped I have broken your shackles and freed you to think for yourselves, if you were previously trapped by these psychological biases. But at the end of the day, it's a fucking game. It's a video game. Like it or not, that's your business. It doesn't really matter much anyways. If you have a different way of looking at things, more power to you. I'm really not bothered. This is just me imparting my observations for those who might be interested. Sorry for all the fucking, like, Persona examples and comparisons in both these videos. I'm not trying to use Persona as, like, a bastion of quality for all storytelling and game design. There's definitely a lot of cringe in that as well. It's just been on the brain recently because of these dog shit spin-offs. And I'd rather just bitch about some things in this video than spend $60 and buy and play through the fucking Warriors spin-off and have enough material to make a whole video out of that. But that's neither here nor there. As always, this was my opinion. Like what you like, more power to you. And all that jazz and stuff. Have a nice day, and see you around. Oh, also, I somehow failed to put this somewhere in this enormous script, but really obvious shit. If Sephiroth wants the Time Ghost gone, why does he seem to be cooperating with the Time Ghost at some points? If the Time Ghost can just be killed with, like, physical brute force, why doesn't Sephiroth do that himself? In the final boss fight, you're fucking idiots fight the Whisperer, Arbiter of Fate, whatever the fuck stupid thing it was, and then you fight Sephiroth, who it's visually unclear, no one explains what the fuck's going on, it's just all Nomura garbage of just complete unexplained nonsense, and then he'll try to come up with an excuse for what the fuck crackpot bullshit later on to try to pretend like he actually had an idea from the start of what he was doing. But wait, no, Nomura's not on it anymore. Well, people have to cover for his stupidity. But anyways, like, it visually seems that, like, Sephiroth is becoming imbued with the power of the Whispers that are supporting him and assisting him in fighting the Clouds group to stop him, but Sephiroth wants the fucking Fate thing to stop, so what's the point of this? And he knows that, like, Cloud beat him last time, so why not just slaughter them all right now? Like, why not just kill the fucking Time Ghosts and then kill Cloud and all of his people and just fuck off? Why did he go out of his way to let the idiot Cloud group know that the fucking Whispers are out and about and doing shit? Why? What's the point of it? If the argument is that he needed Cloud's assistance and their team's assistance to kill the Fate Whispers, I don't believe that's bullshit. They're not strong. Sephiroth is strong. They're not strong. That's so fucking stupid. Did you even play the... God fucking...